Chapter 104. How did you come up with so many novel ideas? After the Minister of Revenue left, Song Junlin hugged Shunyu from behind and asked. It's just a different way of expressing the Minister of Revenue's idea. No matter what it is, the feeling of being forced to do something and the feeling of voluntarily doing it is different. The more money and power a person has, the more they value a good reputation. After donating resources, they can obtain a good reputation recognized by the imperial court and the praise of the people. Why not? Shunyu had dealt with these people too many times in his previous life, so he had his own way of dealing with them. Although Da Huan didn't prohibit merchants, the status of merchants wasn't high. They had enough wealth in their hands, but they were still constrained by various kinds of restrictions. Any local official could bring them big trouble. Every year, the money they used to bribe various officials was not a small amount. Shunyu proposed that as long as they donated, they would be rewarded by the court. Those who contributed a lot could also get special rewards. Instead of spending money to build relationships with officials, it was better to build a good relationship with the court directly. Smart people knew what to do. After the Minister of Revenue returned, he immediately summoned all the officials in the Ministry of Revenue to discuss. The Ministry of Revenue hadn't had a good rest for several days because of this matter. They were in charge of Da Huan's money bag. Such a large national treasury needed to take care of the entire Da Huan. They couldn't just empty it for disaster relief. That would bring huge hidden dangers. Daran, did His Majesty approve our proposal? An official of the Ministry of Revenue asked. It didn't. His Majesty made some changes. Today, I summoned you to discuss the specific implementation. The Minister of Revenue spoke in a deep voice about Shunyu's proposal. What do you think? This method is wonderful. It's much better than the one we gave at the beginning. Yes. This way, it won't be a waste of money. We don't have to worry about too much burden on the people, and we don't have to worry about riots afterwards. It wasn't that they didn't know that the original method would bring huge hidden dangers, but they didn't have a better method for the time being. They could only bite the bullet and use it. Now that there was a better method, of course, they would choose the better one. Only the first official who spoke had a flash of light in his eyes. What does Daran Li think? The previous method was proposed by Daran Li. Didn't Daran Li vow that there was no better method? I was too narrow-minded, Lord Li said reluctantly. It's not Lord Li's fault. Before the minister came up with a new idea, we didn't have any better ideas. I just don't know who came up with this idea. It really helped us a lot. That's right. Sir, please clear our doubts. There are many talented people around His Majesty. You will know in the future. The Minister of Revenue smiled. Sir, why are you still keeping us in suspense at this time? With the boulder in his heart removed, the atmosphere instantly relaxed. All right, let's discuss what to do first. His Majesty is still waiting for an answer. Everyone started a heated discussion. Outside the palace, shopkeeper Shu sent a message saying that Yang Zheng had come looking for him again. He followed Shunyu's instructions and told the other party that Yang Zheng wanted to meet with Shunyu. When Shunyu read the letter, he did not avoid Song Junlin. Song Junlin peeled a grape and put it in Shunyu's mouth. When does you plan to meet him? Does His Majesty have time to go out of the palace recently? Shunyu bit the grape in his mouth. The slightly sour grape juice filled his mouth. Shunyu frowned and swallowed the grape. Song Junlin noticed his expression. What's wrong? The grape is sour. A little. In fact, it was not bad. It was sweet on the whole, but there was a trace of sourness. Shunyu did not like to eat sour things. Then don't eat it. Meng Chang, don't serve this kind of grape in the future. Song Junlin put down the grape in his hand and picked up a handkerchief to wipe his hands. Eunuch Meng hurriedly removed the grapes from the table. Shunyu drank a few mouthfuls of water to relieve the sourness in his mouth. If His Majesty does not have time, I will go out of the palace myself. Song Junlin was very busy recently. He had to personally oversee the matters of the imperial court, the matters of Subei, and the disaster relief. Shunyu woke up several times, but Song Junlin was still busy. I will go with you. No matter how busy he was, Shang Junlin would not let Shen Yu meet Yang Zheng alone. He did not forget the experience in Yang Zheng's eyes when they first met. Shen Yu wrote a reply to shopkeeper Shu and arranged the meeting to be in the afternoon 3 days later. After the finished medical alcohol was made, Shang Junlin gave a part of it to the Imperial Institute of Medicine to let them test the effect. A few days later, the Imperial Institute of Medicine received some results. When Imperial physician Ji Yu came to take Shen Yu's pulse, he mentioned this matter. The medical alcohol that His Majesty gave to the Imperial Institute of Medicine can indeed reduce wound infections. The Imperial Institute of Medicine found some small animals and compared the wounds with and without alcohol. The former was obviously not infected and healed faster. Speaking of this, Imperial physician Ji Yu was very excited. He had studied medicine for many years and knew how serious the consequences of an infected wound could be. Many people died not because of the wound itself, but because of the infection of the wound. If the wound infection could be reduced, patients with large wounds would be more likely to be cured in the future. At the same time, the booklet from the Imperial Institute of Medicine was handed to Shang Junlin's desk. The booklet not only reported the results of this period, but also applied for a new batch of alcohol and permission to use it on wounded patients. After all, using small animals to test medicine was not the same as testing medicine on humans. What's more, the alcohol was sent to the Imperial Institute of Medicine by Shang Junlin's people. Any changes had to be reported to him. If it can really be used on humans, the soldiers at the border will be able to reduce a lot of unnecessary casualties. In Yuzhang Palace, Shang Junlin and Shen Yu talked about this matter with a slightly excited tone. Shang Junlin had entered the army when he was young, so he had a deep understanding of the living conditions of the soldiers at the border. He had experienced too many deaths and knew that many soldiers did not die on the battlefield, but died because their wounds were not properly treated in time. After Shang Junlin ascended the throne, he assigned military doctors to all the troops. However, the worsening of the wounds caused by the worsening of the infection caused by the wounds, and the military doctors were helpless. Shen Yu made some more and sent it to Yuzhang Palace yesterday. Your Majesty can give it to the Imperial Institute of Medicine. If it has the same effect on humans, we can start preparing to popularize alcohol in the army. Yu is right. If it can really reduce the casualties of the soldiers, Shen Yu can be considered to have made a great contribution. After the Imperial Institute of Medicine obtained the alcohol, Shang Junlin specially ordered them to be allowed to bring the alcohol into the imperial prison. The prisoners in the imperial prison were all criminals who had committed heinous crimes and were awaiting punishment. Among them, there were many who had been tortured. It was a good opportunity to test the effects of the alcohol. Led by Imperial physician Ji Yu, several imperial physicians entered the imperial prison with medicine boxes. Later, a terrifying legend began to spread in the imperial prison. It was said that the imperial prison set up a new type of punishment. The torturer wore white clothes and did something to the prisoners. The prisoners' heart-wrenching screams could be heard from afar. During that time, the prisoners in the imperial prison were especially obedient. They would answer whatever questions were asked. The efficiency of handling cases was more than doubled. Isn't Imperial physician Ji Yu killing 2 birds with 1 stone? Shen Yu couldn't help but laugh after reading the booklet. The people from the Supreme Court also asked if they could directly arrange for a few imperial physicians to be stationed in the imperial prison. They said that the methods of the imperial physicians were much better than torture to deal with some difficult prisoners. Shang Junlin also didn't expect such an unexpected development. Imperial physician Ji Yu and the others probably didn't expect that they would become a nightmare for the prisoners in the imperial prison. Needless to say, the Chancellor of the Supreme Court really did visit the Imperial Institute of Medicine. This made Imperial physician Ji Yu and the others speechless. They studied medicine to save the dying and heal the injured, not to torture people. When alcohol came into contact with the wounds, it would indeed cause great irritation. Imperial physician Ji Yu and the others had tried to reduce this irritation, but to no avail. The prisoners had many wounds on their bodies. If they applied alcohol on a large area, it would definitely be unbearable for them. Official Fang and the others finally arrived in Subei. The black-clothed men who were secretly protecting them returned to their hiding places. The ones who came to greet them were Zun Jiao and 2 other officials from Subei, who had arrived earlier. After exchanging some pleasantries, they moved into the Subei government's residence. The other officials all breathed a sigh of relief. Only official Fang knew more than the others and didn't dare to let down his guard. When the supplies arrived, the officials from Subei and the officials from the imperial court began to arrange the disaster relief. Official Fang was led around by several enthusiastic officials from Subei to stroll around the area. Just by looking at this place, one wouldn't think that the disaster was serious. The road was very clean, and there weren't any seriously affected victims on the side of the road. Occasionally, they would see a few people walking by, but they were all in a hurry and didn't dare to look at them. Official Fang secretly remembered these abnormalities in his heart. Let's go back. Won't Official Fang continue to look around? It was impossible to see anything even if he continued to look. Official Fang became suspicious, but he didn't show it on his face. This official is tired. I'll go back and rest first. The 2 officials who accompanied him looked at each other. One of them, who had a goatee, said, Official Fang has traveled a long way to Subei. It's time for you to take a good rest. Rest assured, Official Fang, we will arrange the disaster relief. After returning, Official Fang wrote 2 memorials. One was to be sent to the capital from Subei, and the other was to be handed directly to the black-clothed men who were secretly following him. This unusual memorials wouldn't pass through the hands of any officials and would be sent directly to Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin freed up an afternoon to accompany Shen Yu to the palace to meet Yang Zheng. The agreed meeting place was still Yingxing Tower. The waiter led the 2 to a private room. 2 guests, this is the place. Shen Yu nodded to the waiter and walked into the private room with Shang Junlin. A man in a dark purple robe stood by the window with his back to them. When he heard the sound, he turned his head and saw Shen Yu and Shang Junlin. His eyes flashed with astonishment. It's actually young Master Lin and young Master Yu. Quickly, please take a seat. Yang Zheng quickly restrained the emotions in his eyes and greeted them warmly. I also didn't expect such a coincidence. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin sat down. Yang Zheng poured tea for the 2. When I first met you, I felt that you 2 were very close. I didn't expect that we would have such a fate. Please. Shen Yu picked up the tea and took a sip. I heard from shopkeeper Shu that young Master Yang wants to cooperate with us. How does young Master Yang want to cooperate with us? Since the 2 of you came to see me personally, I won't keep you in suspense. I'm not talented, but I have several business routes. I wonder if the 2 of you are willing to sell these new products from the capital to other places? Yang Zheng vaguely guessed the identity of the 2 people and subconsciously looked at Shang Junlin. No need to look at me. Everything in our family is decided by Madam. Chapter 105. Shen Yu's hand that was holding the teacup paused. He suddenly realized that it was just as Shang Junlin said. Since he entered the palace, everything he did was not restricted. Even when it came to matters related to the imperial court, as long as he mentioned them, Shang Junlin would implement them. A strange feeling welled up in his heart. It was sour and hot. Shen Yu used the action of drinking tea to cover the strange expression on his face for a moment. I didn't think it through. I punish myself by drinking a cup as an apology. Yang Zheng's face flashed with a trace of unnaturalness. He picked up the wine jug, poured himself a full jug of wine, and drank it all in one gulp. Lin. Yang Zheng was stuck. He really couldn't call the 2 words madam in front of the elegant young man. You, Shang Junlin picked up a piece of fish for Shen Yu with his chopsticks. You can call him young Master Yu. Young Master Yu. Yang Zheng had always been generous when it came to banquets. This time, he ordered all the famous dishes of Yingxing Tower. The cost of a table was not small. Yang Zheng didn't immediately talk about business. Shen Yu was also not in a hurry. When both sides were almost done eating, they talked about cooperation. Shen Yu had the intention to cooperate. Otherwise, he wouldn't have personally come to see Yang Zheng. He just had shopkeeper Shu send him away. His identity meant that there were many things he couldn't personally take care of. If there was a reliable partner, it would be much more convenient. Where does young Master Yang want to sell these things? Shunyu put down his chopsticks and wiped his mouth. To be honest, I want to sell these things outside the pass at a high price. Yang Zheng directly said his plan. Outside the pass? Shunyu raised his eyebrows. Does young Master Yang have a trade route to outside the pass? Because of the loss of a large area of land during the reign of the late emperor, Da Huan didn't open the trade route to outside the pass. Of course, there was no explicit ban on merchants doing business outside the pass. As the relationship between Da Huan and other countries stabilized, there were gradually developed merchants who specialized in traveling inside and outside Da Huan. They would sell Da Huan's goods outside the pass at a high price, then bring back goods from outside the pass and sell them at a good price. However, the risk was very high. After all, without the protection of the government, the slightest carelessness could allow robbers to rob them. The loss of property was small, but in serious cases, they could even lose their lives. I have some connections. Yang Zheng smiled. Compared to Da Huan, I prefer to earn money from people outside the border. Yang Zheng was obviously prepared in advance. Their conversation was organized and clear. Shunyu also expressed some of his own ideas. Shang Junlin also joined in the discussion. The final plan was more perfect than the initial one. The smile in Shunyu's eyes deepened. This was the advantage of cooperating with a smart person. There was no need to explain too much. Just point out a point and the other party would understand what it meant. It's not convenient for me to appear often. Shopkeeper Shu will discuss the details of the cooperation with you. If you have any other questions, you can look for Shopkeeper Shu directly. Shopkeeper Shu is in charge of the trading of these items. Shunyu didn't want to go out of the palace often because of this kind of thing. Compared to doing it personally, he preferred to let his subordinates do it. Okay, I'll talk to Shopkeeper Shu about the details. In addition to the items suitable for women, I have some other goods that are suitable to be sold outside the border. If there is a chance, I look forward to continuing our cooperation in the future. I also hope to cooperate with Gongziyu for a long time. Oh right, has Gongziyu heard about the donation order that the Imperial Court is planning to release? The official version hadn't been released yet. The Ministry of Revenue was still discussing the specific reward measures. However, some people who were close to the officials of the Imperial Court had already received the news in advance. For example, Yang Zheng, who had formed a relationship with the Ministry of Works because of road repairs. After receiving the news from the officials he was close to, Yang Zheng had been preparing for this matter. He wasn't a short-sighted person. Of course, he knew how beneficial this matter was for merchants. This was directly receiving the approval of the Imperial Court. It was more useful than having a good relationship with any local official. For them, it was only a little money. Bribing anyone was the same. If they could establish a relationship with the Imperial Court and gain a good reputation, why not? You're talking about the donation to Subei? Shunyu didn't expect the Ministry of Revenue to act so quickly. The news had already been leaked. Yes, I don't know who came up with this idea. It's too beneficial for us merchants. The bosses I know and I have all decided to do our best. Every little bit counts. Yang Zheng casually mentioned it. The local aristocratic families will certainly be willing to contribute. Have the two of you heard that there are several families in Jiangbei that have stockpiled large amounts of grain and are planning to sell it to Subei? Shunyu didn't know about this, but he remembered that in his previous life, several local aristocratic families had suddenly risen at this time. Later, they had provided a lot of convenience to the King of Yu. Your Majesty, why do you think Yang Jing told us about the local aristocratic families? Shunyu asked after returning to Yuzhong Palace. He should have deliberately revealed it to us. If I'm not wrong, the Ministry of Revenue will soon receive this news. The Minister of Revenue got the news from the Minister of Works. After the Minister of Works stopped asking for money from the Ministry of Revenue, the relationship between the two eased up. They were no longer as incompatible as before. They're good. At this time, they're still thinking about making a lot of money. The Minister of Revenue was angry. They didn't send all the grain to Subei because they were afraid something like this would happen. If the grain fell into the hands of the aristocratic families, these people would only raise the price in order to make money. If the common people couldn't afford the grain, there would be a big problem sooner or later. Don't be angry. Didn't we know about it in advance? When the time comes, we'll think of a way to get them to donate a batch of grain. The Minister of Works comforted. I have to think of a way to squeeze more grain out of them. They actually want to take advantage of the drought in Subei to make money without conscience. After the Minister of Revenue returned, he immediately called people from the Ministry of Revenue to talk about this matter. In fact, they all knew that because of the late emperor, there were many internal problems in Dahuan. Compared to the capital, there were more problems in the local areas. The aristocratic families were growing stronger day by day, and the vassal kings had too much control over the local areas. These were all problems that needed to be solved. The next day, Shang Junlin received a booklet from the Minister of Revenue regarding the local donation plan. After reading it, even though he knew that the Minister of Revenue wouldn't let go of this opportunity, he didn't expect him to be so ruthless. What's going on? Shun Yu walked over and took the booklet from Shang Junlin's hands. What's written here? It's from the Minister of Revenue. Shang Junlin's eyes revealed a trace of a smile. It seems that he's furious. The booklet wrote what he heard from the Minister of Works. He deeply felt that these aristocratic families had a heart for the country and the people, and intended to help them fulfill their wishes. After reading it, Shun Yu was amused. If those aristocratic families knew that their intentions were misinterpreted by the Minister of Revenue like this, their expressions would probably be very good. These people didn't care about what would happen in Subei at all. They just wanted to take this opportunity to make a big profit. Shang Junlin later sent people to investigate. The aristocratic families in the capital knew how to restrain themselves. Many of the aristocratic families in the capital had already begun to wantonly purchase grain. However, the price they offered was slightly higher than the market price. The people happily sold the surplus grain at home. If they didn't discover it in time, when the national treasury was empty, these aristocratic families would have enough grain in their hands. The price of grain in the market would be controlled by them. At that time, it would be time for them to wantonly amass wealth. Shun Yu didn't know how the matter in Subei was resolved in his previous life, but according to the subsequent development, it seems that many hidden dangers were buried. The vassal kings also have a lot of supplies in their hands. After operating for so many years, some people's private stores are even richer than the national treasury. It's not a day or two that I've wanted to move against them. The vassal kings were always a thorn in the emperor's heart. We can't rush to deal with the vassal kings, but we can collect some interest first. After enjoying the convenience of the imperial family for so long, it's time for them to contribute to Dahuan. Shun Yu hooked the corners of his mouth. Yu is right. Being led astray by Shun Yu, Shang Junlin had already begun to imagine what they could take from the vassal kings and use them in Subei. Does your majesty plan to transport these collected supplies to the capital and then to Subei? Shun Yu walked to Shang Junlin and sat down. If it's urgent, your majesty might as well directly transport them from the original place. But this way, special officials will need to be sent to the place to supervise this matter. Before arriving in Subei, the local garrison will escort them. After arriving in Subei, they will be escorted by the Subei army. Shang Junlin thought for a moment and felt that this was also a good idea. After the Ministry of Revenue's discussion, the matter of donating to Subei was raised in the morning court. Although the ministers had already heard the rumors, they still felt that it was inconceivable when they officially heard it. In particular, the Minister of Revenue's idea was that the bulk of the donations came from the people. It was undeniable that the method proposed by the Minister of Revenue could solve the current predicament of the imperial court, but this official thinks it's inappropriate. What's inappropriate? The Minister of Revenue glared at him. Or can Jordaran think of a better way? Then this official will listen with respectful attention. How can the imperial court ask for money from the people? Isn't this embarrassing? How is this asking for money? Isn't it voluntary? As a citizen of Dahuan, Dahuan is in trouble, so it's reasonable to contribute. Or is Jordaran unwilling to contribute? This official thinks that this method is very good. The Prime Minister stood up. To show my support, this official is willing to donate 1,000 taels of silver. The other 2 cabinet ministers also stood up and expressed their willingness to donate money and food. From the moment the Ministry of Revenue leaked the news, they knew that His Majesty was determined to do this. Rather than oppose it and make His Majesty unhappy, it was better to agree and contribute. Putting aside everything else, they also felt that this method was the most beneficial for Da Huan. They were already in the cabinet, so the first thing they had to ensure was Da Huan's stability. After the ministers' discussion, the method proposed by the Minister of Revenue was further improved. After it was finally confirmed that there were no mistakes, it could be implemented. The people in the capital who had connections heard the news and began to make preparations. Shang Junlin came back from court and didn't find Shen Yu in the room. "Where is Gui Jun?" "Greetings, Your Majesty." The palace servant who was called hurriedly saluted. "Gui Jun is in the small theatre over there." Shang Junlin went to the small theatre. The small theatre was north of Yuzhong Palace. Shen Yu rarely went there. Some time ago, he had discussed with Shang Junlin to redecorate it. Before he walked in, he heard the sound of opera from inside. When did you like to listen to opera? Shang Junlin walked into the small theatre and happened to see Shen Yu lowering his head and saying something to a person in a pink costume. Before he could be jealous, he saw Shen Yu waving at him. "Your Majesty, come quickly. Let's see how this part can be changed." "What are you doing?" Shang Junlin didn't know what was going on and walked over. "I'm making up a play for the people in the capital. Before the imperial court issues an order, let them understand the meaning of what they are doing." Chapter 106. This was what Shen Yu had thought of recently. The disaster relief method that the imperial court was about to announce was not only in Da Huan, but also in the previous dynasties. Unlike the ministers in the imperial court who understood this method after a dispute, the people of Da Huan didn't understand this method. If someone had evil intentions at this time, the people who didn't know the inside story would easily fall into the trap. Yu intends to use opera to let the people understand? Shang Junlin picked up the script in Shen Yu's hand and asked. "Yes, I originally wanted to let some small officials explain it to the people. Later on, I thought that oral explanations might not be enough to reach the people's hearts. I have to find another method. It's best to mobilize the people's discussion and thinking." The people of Da Huan loved to listen to opera. Shen Yu wanted to weave this method into the opera, and then let the opera troupe sing it for the people. Shang Junlin roughly flipped through the script. Right now, it was only a rough outline of the story. He was very familiar with the handwriting on the script. It was Shen Yu's. Yu is very thoughtful. After Shang Junlin finished reading the story, he felt that this story was just right. The disaster relief was linked throughout the entire story. Everything that happened in the opera revolved around it. What's more, Shen Yu also included the possibility that someone might maliciously misinterpret the imperial court's meaning. He was very thoughtful. Even if someone wanted to use this to cause trouble, their first reaction would be that it was a bad person in the opera. Shen Yu was almost done with his work. It just so happened that it was time to eat. He said a few words to the opera troupe and then left with Shang Junlin. "I was scared to death just now." The woman in blue patted her chest. "With the emperor here, I didn't even dare to breathe loudly. I didn't expect that the first meeting with the emperor would be under such circumstances." The slightly older man sighed. Their opera troupe specialized in serving the imperial family. When the previous emperor was on the throne, he liked to enjoy life. The opera troupe often went in and out of the palace. Later, the new emperor who ascended the throne didn't like to enjoy life, so the opera troupe was completely idle. He had taken over the position of the troupe leader from his master after the new emperor ascended the throne. He had thought that he would be able to show off his skills and bring the troupe to greater heights, but the truth was that the troupe had been silent in his hands until now. The troupe leader instructed the people below to continue preparing for the new show. This was their only chance. Whether or not they could make a beautiful comeback depended on this. It is our honor that Your Highness is willing to give us this opportunity. Everyone, cheer up. We must complete this matter perfectly and live up to Your Highness' expectations. Yes. Those who were able to enter this troupe were all ambitious. To be able to provide entertainment for the royal family, they had to be the best troupe in the capital. In the past, they didn't have this opportunity, but now that they did, they had to perform well and not tarnish the reputation of the troupe. Eunuch Meng had left and returned. The troupe leader asked nervously, "I wonder if Eunuch Meng has any instructions?" Although they rarely went in and out of the palace, they still knew that Eunuch Meng was the emperor's favorite person. "I don't dare to give instructions. His Majesty specifically sent me here to tell you that after you have finished transcribing Your Highness's script, remember to hand it over to His Majesty." Eunuch Meng smiled kindly. "I understand. So it was because of this matter." The troop leader let out a sigh of relief. "You must do it as soon as possible. His Majesty doesn't like Your Highness's things to be in the hands of others for too long." Eunuch Meng emphasized. "Yes, yes." The troop leader wiped the sweat from his forehead and watched Eunuch Meng leave. "Troop leader, why did His Majesty suddenly ask for the script back?" The man in pink walked over with a puzzled expression. "Don't worry about it so much. Find someone with good handwriting and transcribe the script first." In just a short while, the troop leader had already seen how much His Majesty cared about this emperor. It wasn't surprising that he would ask for the script that Your Highness had personally written. "I'll do it. I can also deepen my understanding of the role." The man in pink volunteered. He was playing one of the main characters and had a lot of scenes. He really needed to understand the script very well. The troop leader hesitated for a moment before agreeing. The man in pink happily took the script and went to transcribe it. The others looked enviously at the back of the man in pink. They had all been retrained in the troupe. They had never entered the palace and had never seen the nobles in the palace. "Before we came, the teachers in the troupe warned us that we must be very, very careful after entering the palace. The slightest carelessness will cause us to make mistakes. At that time, it would be a small matter if something happened to us, but if we implicated the troupe, it wouldn't be too much to ask for our deaths. As a result, I've always been very nervous. After coming here, I realized that it was completely different from what the teachers said." The youth who spoke was about 16 or 17 years old. His face still had a hint of immaturity and his eyes were clear. "Me too. When I entered the palace, I had to be very careful with every step. I was afraid that I would take a wrong step. When I was waiting to see Your Highness, I was so nervous that my heart almost stopped. After seeing Your Highness, I realized that Your Highness is completely different from the nobles that the teachers said. He is approachable and doesn't put on any airs. If there is something that we don't understand, he will explain it to us. I just plucked up my courage to ask Your Highness a question." "Your Highness' voice is really nice to hear." The youth who spoke laughed. "I shouldn't have hesitated just now. Otherwise, I would have been able to ask Your Highness a question. It doesn't matter. Your Highness will definitely come again in the future. We still have a chance. Your Highness is beautiful, has a nice voice, and is talented. No wonder Your Highness is always favored. I envy Nan Qiao. He asked Your Highness a lot of questions today and Your Highness answered all of them for him. Now, he can even transcribe the script. I also want to, who doesn't want to? But our handwriting is not as good as Nan Qiao's. When the troop leader told us to practice our handwriting, we shouldn't have been lazy." The others nodded in agreement. Today's experience fully showed that good handwriting was really important. Before the new drama was finished, they needed to live here. Considering that most of the people who came were young, Shen Yu specially ordered the kitchen to make some delicious food for them. After Shen Yu entered the palace, the craftsmanship of the imperial chefs in the palace skyrocketed. Not to mention other things, they could be said to be handy when it came to cooking delicious food. With Shen Yu's instructions, the deliciousness of the food the troupe ate in the palace was far better than outside. "Master, when you came to the palace before, did you eat such delicious food?" The large table of food was finished. The youths who were full collapsed on the chairs and became more and more curious about the senior in the palace. The middle-aged man who was called master was silent for a while. No, these should be specially ordered by your highness. In the eyes of your highness, they were just servants. The food they ate was not much better than the palace servants. How could they be treated like today? It was not a secret that Shen Yu summoned the performers to Yuzhang Palace. Although they did not know what Shen Yu's purpose was, the ministers who heard the news still frowned. How can your majesty be so mischievous? The north is facing a drought, and you still condone your highness to enjoy himself. Your majesty has favored the legitimate son of Count North for a long time. If you don't like it, you can impeach him. Now, who dares to impeach this matter? Look at what happened to the previous imperial censors. The ones who impeached the most ruthlessly have long disappeared from the court. Are you going to let your majesty be so mischievous? What do you think, Prime Minister? Is your majesty ignoring the court or what? Did your highness summon the troop into the palace affect the government? Has his majesty been too lazy to enjoy himself and ignore political affairs? Your highness has been in the palace for so long. Have you done anything harmful to Da Huan? The prime minister's series of questions made the ministers confused. They murmured. No. That's it. I say, you are all idle. You keep an eye on the affairs of the harem every day. Have you finished the government affairs in your hands? Have you understood the specific measures regarding the donation? Don't make me teach you step by step. The prime minister, who was almost crazy with work, really couldn't stand these people who didn't do proper business. Several officials were asked until their faces turned red. They lowered their heads and went back to do their own things. Yuzhang Palace. After the meal, Shen Yu lay on Shang Junlin's lap and read a novel. The novel was bought from outside the palace. After knowing Shen Yu's preferences, there would be palace servants who were responsible for purchasing the latest novel for Shen Yu every month. After half a year, Shen Yu had finished reading all the novels in the palace's library. When I went to the small theater, what was you talking about with the woman in pink? Shen Yu was reading something interesting and was interrupted. She was stunned. What woman in pink? After asking, she realized what Shang Junlin was asking. She explained with a smile, that was a man. It's just that his frame was small and he was short. He was one of the main characters. He was asking me some things about the play. There are so many people. Why did he ask you? If you can't understand, you can just ask someone else. Shang Junlin twirled a strand of Shen Yu's hair around his fingertips. Why is your majesty so unreasonable? Shen Yu raised his head and looked at Shang Junlin with interest. Your majesty only saw him. Before your majesty came, many people also asked me questions. According to your majesty's idea, these people should be replaced. Shang Junlin pursed his lips as he imagined that scene. Shen Yu raised his hand and poked Shang Junlin's chin. Is your majesty angry? I'm not. The next time I go there, I'll accompany you. Shang Junlin knew how good AU was. It was normal for such a good AU to be liked by many people. He just felt unhappy that his treasure was being peeped at by others. You're really not angry? Shen Yu raised his head and asked. No, I'm not angry at you for this kind of thing. Shang Junlin denied. Okay then, tilde Shen Yu deliberately dragged out his tone. I originally wanted to kiss your majesty if you were angry. Since your majesty isn't angry, I'm angry. Shang Junlin suddenly interrupted Shen Yu's words. I'm angry. Ha ha ha. Shen Yu shook with laughter on Shang Junlin's legs. Your majesty just said that you wouldn't be angry over this kind of thing. I said that I wouldn't be angry at you, but I didn't say that I wouldn't be angry at others. Seeing that scene, Shang Junlin almost couldn't suppress the violence in his heart. Of course, he wouldn't blame you. He wouldn't be angry at you. He only blamed those who deliberately approached you. If Shen Yu hadn't noticed his arrival and stopped him, Shang Junlin didn't know what he would have done. The violence in his heart could only be soothed by Shen Yu. Shang Junlin stared fixedly at Shen Yu. The affection in his eyes was like thick ink that couldn't be melted. His pupils were originally pitch black. When he stared at someone so intently, that person's reflection was imprinted in his eyes. It was as if he wanted to suck that person in. Shen Yu was stared at by him and slowly stopped laughing. He could feel the drowning feelings in Shang Junlin's eyes. He propped himself up with one hand and hooked Shang Junlin's neck with the other, slowly approaching him. Then I'll kiss your majesty. Your majesty won't be angry, okay? Chapter 107. Shen Yu's voice was very low. Every word seemed to have a hook, drilling into Shang Junlin's heart. Shang Junlin supported Shen Yu's waist with one hand, supporting the young man's body. Shen Yu saw that he would not fall, so he put his hands on Shang Junlin's shoulders. The distance between the two was getting closer and closer. They looked at each other, and each other's figure was reflected in their eyes. Their lips touched. The tremor suddenly increased. Shen Yu slowly closed his eyes and pecked the man's lips. Shang Junlin put his other hand on Shen Yu's waist, and his fingers clasped her flexible waist. He resisted the urge to tear the young man apart and swallow him whole, allowing the other party to touch his lips lightly. It was like drinking poison to quench thirst. Shen Yu knew that the other party would not be satisfied with such a touch, so he slowly pried open the other party's lips and entered. Similar to Shen Yu's usual style, there was no straightforward violence. Every movement was extremely seductive, and it was likely to lead people into the abyss of desire. Shang Junlin's breathing became heavier and heavier. When Shen Yu was about to withdraw, he took the initiative, captured the young man's lips, and heavily invaded. His attack was fiercer than ever before. His white and slender fingers weakly grabbed the black clothes on the man's shoulders, leaving wrinkles. However, at this time, no one cared about the marks left on the expensive clothes. After the kiss, Shen Yu leaned on the man's shoulder, panting slightly. Your Majesty, are you still angry? Shang Junlin's eyes were dark, and his voice was slightly hoarse. If I say that I'm still angry, will you coax me again? What do you think, Your Majesty? Shen Yu's voice was lazy, and a little hoarse. After his breathing calmed down, Shen Yu turned over and leaned on Shang Junlin's chest. The man put his arm around the waist and put it on Shen Yu's lower abdomen. Shen Yu glanced at the table. Shang Junlin's half-approved booklets were spread open on the table. There was also a thick stack of booklets waiting to be approved. Your Majesty, please approve the memorials first. Shen Yu pointed at the pile of unfinished memorials. You, accompany me. Shang Junlin rested his head on Shen Yu's shoulder, reached out to pick up a memorial and spread it open. This booklet was written by the Prime Minister, and it was about the examination of officials. Every year in Da Huan, there would be an official assessment. Based on the results of the assessment, the next year's official would be promoted or demoted. In the past, this matter was handled by the cabinet. The examination of the officials was set to take place in the winter, and the content of the examination was the performance of the officials for the year. Specialized officials would report the situation to the cabinet, and after the cabinet discussed it, they would report it to the emperor, who would make the final decision. During this period of time, the Prime Minister was very busy. Especially when he found that some officials were slacking off all day, he felt that it was intolerable. He directly asked the emperor to reinvestigate the assessment of these officials in the past years. At the end of the memorial, he said that he hoped that the emperor could send a few useful people to help him. The other two ministers in the cabinet were also busy. They were busy with the affairs of the court and the family. They had to determine the amount of materials and gold to be donated before the donation was announced to the public. They couldn't let outsiders look down on the aristocratic families, and they couldn't let the emperor be afraid of them because of this. In addition, Shang Junlin was more assured to let the Prime Minister handle this matter. Compared to the other two ministers in the cabinet, the Prime Minister's shoulders were heavier. As for the officials, Your Majesty might as well send He Changyu and the others to the Prime Minister's side. They can help the Prime Minister and also get some practice in advance. Shen Yu thought of He Changyu and the others who were still in the Hanlin Academy and suggested, I also have the same idea. In comparison, the Hanlin Academy is currently the most leisurely. The court is short of manpower, so they can get used to it in advance. The next day, He Changyu, Jiang Huiqing, and Fang Jiari, who were on duty in the Hanlin Academy as usual, all received the imperial edict from the palace. The three of them were stopped at the entrance of the Hanlin Academy. After the imperial edict was read, The eunuch who announced the edict urged them, "The three of you should quickly pack up and follow me to the Prime Minister's side." Jiang Huiqing and He Chengyu looked at each other and saw the confusion in each other's eyes. Although they didn't know what was going on, they quickly packed up and were sent to the Prime Minister's side. The Prime Minister was sitting in the study dealing with official business. When he saw them, he said faintly, "Since the Emperor sent you here, you should do your work well and don't worry about anything else. Look over there, these are the things you need to deal with today. Go." After that, the Prime Minister lowered his head and continued to do his work. Jiang Huiqing looked at the place the Prime Minister pointed at and saw 5 stacks of documents on the small table. He couldn't believe his eyes. These were the things they needed to deal with today. A few days later, Jiang Huiqing rubbed his sore neck as he walked out of the Prime Minister's residence. "These past few days, I've realized how difficult it is to be a good official. Every day, he had to deal with endless documents. Compared to working in the Prime Minister's residence, his days at the Hanlin Academy couldn't be more relaxed. The Prime Minister really doesn't have it easy," Fang Jiari sighed. "I always thought that my father was very busy. I didn't expect the Prime Minister to be even more busy. Although it's a bit tiring, I've learned a lot these past few days. Other than being serious about official business, the Prime Minister is very easy to get along with." The officials of the imperial court had also noticed that the Prime Minister had been following the top 3 of this year's batch. He brought them with him wherever he went. Later on, he even brought them with him to morning court. There were some people who complained about this, but since the Emperor didn't blame them, they couldn't say anything. The 2 memorials written by official Fang arrived at Shang Junlin's desk one after another, explaining the true situation in Subei. The first one arrived earlier, and the other one arrived at the palace 7 days later through official channels. This one was deliberately released by Fang Jun to deceive others. Shang Junlin finished reading the 2 memorials and picked up the one that arrived later. It says that everything in Subei is normal, the disaster situation isn't serious, and the supplies they brought are just enough. Then this one is about the suspicious points in Subei. Xunyu picked up the other one, but didn't open it. "How's the situation in the Subei army? If there were only problems within the officials, the matter would be easier to solve. If there were also problems within the Subei army, it would be troublesome. Fang Jun hasn't found any abnormalities for the time being. When I was in Subei, I separated the Subei army from the Subei army's official system. The 2 sides operate independently and don't interfere with each other. Shang Junlin had done this because he didn't feel at ease leaving the Subei army in the hands of the Subei army's officials. Your Majesty didn't send Jiyu Huai and the hidden dragon guards just to secretly protect official Fang, right?" Xunyu walked around and sat down next to Shang Junlin. "You knows me well. Their true goal is the Subei army. I need to understand the situation in the Subei army. Subei was an important barrier between Da Huan and the Northern Desert. The existence of the Subei army deterred the Northern Desert from sending troops south. Every time the Northern Desert army tried to invade Da Huan, they would be stopped outside the pass by the Subei army. Late at night, Subei. Men in black sneaked into the Subei army like ghosts and didn't make a sound. They were all wearing black masks, which reflected a cold metallic glow under the faint moonlight. Who is it? Shish, a silver dagger was pressed against his neck, and a cold aura enveloped him. Who are you? Do you know that trespassing into a military camp is a serious crime? If you don't tell us, no one will know that someone was here tonight. A hoarse voice came from behind. The man wanted to turn around, but the moment he moved, the dagger on his neck sank into his flesh. He was so scared that he didn't dare to move again. Let's talk nicely. Let's talk nicely. Let me ask you. Do you know that the imperial court sent people to Subei? I know. They're here for disaster relief. What else do you know? Speak. The dagger pierced his skin, causing him to feel a stinging pain. I really don't know anything else. I'll talk. They seem to be very concerned about the Subei army situation and the disaster there. Some of the supplies they brought with them were stolen before they reached Subei. That's all I know. Really? The man behind him asked a few more questions. The last sentence scared him so much that he broke out in a cold sweat. I know you entered the Subei army through connections. It's best if you don't tell anyone about what happened tonight. I'm sure the people behind you don't want to see the spy they spent so much effort to send into the Subei army disappear without a trace before he could do anything. The grip on his neck loosened. The man turned his head to look. There was no one else in the tent except for himself. If it weren't for the wound on his neck reminding him that everything that had happened was real, he would have suspected that he was having a nightmare. He touched his neck, but he didn't feel any blood. Refusing to believe it, he got up and walked to the basin where the water was and leaned over to look. His neck was really intact. Could it be that it was really just a dream? The man touched his neck, puzzled. He really was a high-ranking official of Subei who had inserted him into the Subei army. On the surface, his identity had nothing to do with that official. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to enter the Subei army. Only a few people knew about this. He wanted to pass on what had just happened to his superiors, but he suddenly realized that something was wrong. He forced himself to suppress the idea. He couldn't gamble with his life. The next day, he indirectly asked the soldiers guarding outside the tent. Everyone said that nothing unusual had happened last night. Mr. Hu, did something happen? Mr. Hu subconsciously touched his neck. It's nothing. Is the general in the tent now? I have some questions about the disaster relief. Yes, this way please. The hidden dragon guards personally delivered the information about the Subei army to Shang Junlin. The Prime Minister seems to think highly of He Chengyu and the other two. Shunyu glanced at Shang Junlin's open memorial. He has praised them several times. I heard that ever since the three of them started working for the Prime Minister has been able to spare some time to drink tea every day. He can also occasionally play chess with Jiang Huiqing and He Chengyu. Shang Junlin didn't comment on the Prime Minister's comfortable life. Huiqing also wrote to me. Other than the large amount of documents they have to deal with every day, the Prime Minister takes good care of them in other aspects. In just a few days, the three of them had matured a lot. With their help, the Prime Minister's progress had also sped up. When Xunyu's play was performed outside the palace, the donation policy would officially be implemented. He's still writing to you. Shang Junlin held Xunyu's waist and pinched the soft flesh on his waist. When will you write a letter to me? Didn't the outside of the palace send in some peach blossom letters last time? You can use those to write. No wonder your Majesty looked at them for so long last time. Why didn't you tell me at that time? Shunyu turned his head to look at Shang Junlin with a teasing look in his eyes. Also, the people in the opera troupe said that your Majesty took away my manuscript. Why does your Majesty want the original manuscript? Chapter 108. Shang Junlin was not annoyed at being exposed. Instead, he lifted Xunyu's chin and said, Your Highness's authentic works should naturally be in my hands. What does you think? Your Highness is right, Xunyu said with a smile. What about the ones I wrote for Jiang Huiqing? Does your Highness want to keep them in your hands too? Shang Junlin thought about it seriously. In fact, he wanted to keep them, but those were written for other people. They were different from the script. Seeing Shang Junlin thinking seriously, Xunyu was overjoyed. Your Highness, you don't really want to keep those letters for yourself, do you? You wrote so many letters to him, but he never wrote to me even once. Shang Junlin was dissatisfied. He also wanted Xunyu's handwritten letters. Your Highness is very busy every day. Don't you feel tired of reading the memorials and letters? If he was the one dealing with these matters, Xunyu would not want to read these things in his free time at all. Can you write the same as them? I'm willing to read any amount. Shang Junlin's eyes were deep. Then, Xunyu dragged out the last word. What does your Highness want me to write? A love poem? A personal note? Or something else? Shang Junlin replied reservedly, I'm fine with anything. He wanted everything. Xunyu smiled and glanced at him. I'll remember it. I'll write it for your Highness. Your Highness, you can wait patiently. Since he had agreed, Xunyu began to think about what to write for Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin got the answer he wanted. He was much more efficient in approving memorials. Gui Jun, the small theater, sent a message saying that the play has been arranged. They want you to take a look. Mu Shi walked in from outside and said. Shun Yu was writing a letter. On the table, there was a pink letter paper. On the paper, there were peach blossoms. It was sent to the palace by Boss Yi last time. Together with it, there was a light blue and light green. According to Boss Yi, these letters sold very well and were very popular with the young masters and young ladies of aristocratic families. Even if the price was expensive, they could still be sold out quickly. Pink was suitable for expressing one's feelings. It was best used to write a letter to one's sweetheart to express one's yearning. If one was shy, light blue could be used instead. Shang Junlin specifically asked for pink paper, so Xin Yu asked Mu Shi to take out the pink paper from the storeroom. She planned to write a piece of pink paper first. The tip of the brush dipped in ink, and a beautiful hairpin-style small regular script appeared vividly on the paper. After finishing the last stroke, Xin Yu put away the brush and said, "Go and tell them that His Majesty and I will be there this evening." Yes, this servant will take her leave. After Mu Shi left, Xin Yu looked at the pink letter on the table and couldn't help but smile. Who would have thought that the decisive His Majesty would ask for a small letter in private? When the ink on the paper was dry, Xin Yu put the letter away and put it in the envelope prepared in advance. The envelope was also sent by Boss Yi. The seal was printed with peach blossoms so that people could see what the content of the letter would be at a glance. The effect of medical alcohol had been verified. How to produce alcohol on a large scale became a big problem. Shun Yu's method was still too inefficient. The Imperial Institute of Medicine had now obtained the method to produce alcohol. They also asked for several sets of glass equipment from the palace and made several spare rooms for the production of medical alcohol. In order to avoid confusion with alcohol, they were thinking about a new name for medical alcohol. Alcohol concentration is too high to drink directly. It will be life-threatening. Could it be that those who were poisoned by alcohol in the past were poisoned because they drank too high of alcohol concentration? Was it because someone poisoned them or they ate something that was harmful to them? Over the years, deaths caused by drinking were not rare. Countless doctors had studied this problem, but they still couldn't find a solution. After investigation, they found that these people who died had almost nothing in common except drinking. It's not impossible. The person who sent the alcohol from the palace also repeatedly warned that the alcohol produced by this method should not be drunk. If it wants to have an effect on the wound, it must be mixed accurately. Otherwise, not only will it not reduce the wound infection, but it will also cause secondary damage to the wound. The Imperial Institute of Medicine's envoy, Imperial Dr. Wu, emphasized again, "Remember, it must be made strictly according to the ratio." Yes. Ji Yu Chong, come with me. Imperial Dr. Wu was old and had planned to retire. Imperial Dr. Ji Yu was the junior he thought highly of. Although he was still young, his medical skills were brilliant and he was steady in doing things. He was the most promising successor. He also vaguely expressed his opinion to His Majesty. He knew that in terms of qualifications, Imperial Dr. Ji Yu was not as good as the other two, but in terms of other things, Imperial Dr. Ji Yu was the most suitable. I called you out to tell you that I will be retiring at the end of this year at the latest. I have recommended you to His Majesty to take over the position of envoy. You must perform well during this time. Imperial Dr. Wu patted Imperial Dr. Gu's shoulder. This. Imperial Dr. Ji Yu was stunned for a moment. There are many more people in the Imperial Institute of Medicine who are more qualified than me. Why would you recommend me? I believe in your medical skills and I believe in your character. I also know that you are young and it will be difficult for you to control the people below. Don't worry, I will arrange everything. Since you have taken care of His Majesty's health, His Majesty will not make things difficult for you. Before making this decision, Imperial Dr. Wu had thought about it for a long time. In the end, he made this seemingly irrational decision. He could feel that the Imperial Institute of Medicine was going through some changes in the Great Huan Kingdom. At this time, the person in charge was especially important. If it was any other time, it would be fine for the person in charge to be mediocre. But in the vortex of change, mediocrity would become the original sin. The two people who were talking didn't notice that someone was quietly following them and listening to their conversation. Imperial Doctor Sun hid behind a pillar, his face extremely ugly. Last time, he took Imperial Doctor Gu's position to treat Prince Huayu. He thought that by saving the prince's life, he could at least get something. Who would have thought that not long after, Prince Huayu was condemned by the imperial court? Not to mention a reward, it would be good if he wasn't implicated. After that incident, he hid like a quail for a period of time. Seeing that Imperial Doctor Gu was getting more and more powerful, he couldn't sit still anymore. When Imperial Doctor Wu asked Imperial Doctor Gu out alone, he knew something would happen, so he quietly followed. He never thought that he would let himself hear such a conversation. He entered the Imperial Institute of Medicine earlier than Imperial Doctor Gu, and his medical skills were not inferior. Why did Imperial Doctor Wu pass the position to someone who wasn't qualified? And he even tried his best to pave the way for him? Was it just because Imperial Doctor Gu took care of His Majesty's health? Imperial Doctor Sun glared in Imperial Doctor Gu's direction. He waited until the two finished talking and left before coming out from behind the pillar. He wouldn't let it go just like that. That position, anyone could sit, except for Imperial Doctor Gu. In the evening, Shun Yu and Shang Junlin arrived at the small opera house together. When they heard that His Majesty the Emperor was coming with His Majesty the Emperor, the people in the opera troupe were very nervous. They still remembered that when His Majesty first came, he had a cold aura that made people not dare to look directly at him. Be careful. This time, we are going to show His Majesty the Emperor if there is anything that needs to be changed. In a few days, you will have to face the people of the entire capital. The troop leader inspected carefully, trying to make sure that there were no mistakes. I think that facing His Majesty is more terrifying than facing the people of the entire capital. A young man muttered softly. The others nodded in agreement. Of course, they would rather face a group of people below the stage. After all, that was a scene that they were familiar with. But I'm still very happy to be able to perform for His Majesty. Since that time, His Majesty has only summoned the troop leader to meet him alone. I'm so envious of the troop leader. The troop leader had already walked to their side. The others were silent, and the young man who just spoke also hurriedly lowered his head. The troop leader wanted to ease the atmosphere and said, "If you have to face His Majesty's oppressive gaze when meeting His Majesty, would you still be willing?" It turned out that not only would they have to meet His Majesty, they would also have to meet His Majesty. The young men widened their eyes as if to say, "Troop leader, you're so pitiful." The troop leader's mouth twitched. "All right, hurry up and get ready. His Majesty and His Majesty will be here soon." Because Shang Junlin was jealous, Shun Yu didn't come to the small theater anymore. Every time he wanted to come, he would be stopped by Shang Junlin for various reasons. If it happened once or twice, it could be said that it was a coincidence. However, after 4 or 5 times, Shun Yu understood that Shang Junlin was doing it on purpose. If their performance doesn't meet my requirements, how does Your Majesty plan to compensate me? That's their problem. Why are you blaming me? Your Majesty, you really don't know? Shun Yu poked his arm. Who was the one who found all kinds of reasons to not let me come to the small theater to see the progress? I've already given such detailed instructions, but they still can't perform. You might as well directly replace them. Your Majesty, you can't say that. The performance this time is not the same as the previous ones. It's normal that they can't grasp some parts. Later, in order to take care of Shang Junlin's emotions, Shun Yu called the troop leader to the main hall for questioning. Fortunately, the troop leader was a smart person. He knew the purpose of Shun Yu's arrangement. Not only did he perfectly implement Shun Yu's ideas, but he also made a lot of useful suggestions. After all, Shun Yu was a layman. His understanding of this aspect was not as good as that of the troop leader, who grew up in primary school. After improvement, the performance of this play would be better. Your Majesty has arrived. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. The troop knelt down and saluted. No need to be so courteous. Today, I came with Your Majesty just to be the first to see this play. Shang Junlin sat down with Shun Yu. Let Mu Shi and eunuch Meng sit at the back and watch. Shunyu glanced at the palace servants standing at the side. They sat in the middle of the front row with the best view. There were many empty seats behind them. Shunyu glanced at them and simply let the troop members sit at the back. At the beginning, there was a cheerful piece of music. The beginning of the story was also cheerful. Gradually, the music became sad. The two childhood sweethearts had to separate. One went to the north to join the army, and the other stayed in her hometown. In the blink of an eye, a few years had passed. Natural disasters came and starved people were everywhere. The woman who stayed in her hometown made a lot of money in the business world. Thinking of her lover who was far away in the disaster area, she decided to do something. The imperial court's relief food was embezzled by the corrupt officials. They organized people to donate money and food. More and more people joined the team. The imperial court also sent new officials to punish the corrupt officials. These life-saving supplies were gathered by the people little by little to the disaster area. In the end, the evil people were punished. The woman and her lover hugged each other tightly after the disaster passed. Everyone was happy. Shunyu stood up and clapped his hands. Not bad, this is very good. On the stage, the man in pink who played the role of the woman heard these words and his eyes lit up. Shunyu turned to look at the palace servants and the other members of the troupe. Everyone's face was full of excitement. Obviously, their emotions had been completely stirred up. This was the effect that Shunyu wanted. The play didn't need to be obscure or elegant. The most important thing was that it could make the audience feel immersed. They couldn't help but think. What should they do in such a situation? What could they do? Now that there was a drought in the north, could they also do something? Could she also be like the woman in the play and do her part? No matter how small a person's strength is, when gathered together, it is an unshakable force. Shang Junlin understood this principle very well. Yes, some people will always ignore that many little things make a mickle. People who are too arrogant will fall sooner or later. Shunyu discussed some details with the troop leader and returned to the bedroom with Shang Junlin. Did you notice that the man in pink has been moving closer to you? Shang Junlin approached Shunyu from behind. No. Shunyu's mind was on the play. He didn't have time to pay attention to these things. Pleased by Shunyu's answer, Shang Junlin laughed in a low voice. Shunyu's ears were numb from his laughter. Didn't His Majesty want me to write a letter to you? I've written it. Shunyu walked to the secret compartment and took out the envelope. I've written 23 letters to Jiang Huiqing. I've written twice to His Majesty. This is the first letter. Does His Majesty want to see it? Chapter 109. Shang Junlin reached out his hand. Use good intentions, I will not disappoint you. Your Majesty can think that way. Shunyu looked at him with a faint smile and put the letter in his big palm. Shang Junlin didn't open the letter in front of Shunyu, but put it in his arms. Your Majesty, don't you want to see what I wrote? As long as it's written by a you, I will like it. Shunyu saw that he really didn't want to open the letter immediately, so he didn't force him. In fact, he was quite curious about Shunyu's reaction when he read the letter. At night, after Shunyu fell asleep, Shang Junlin looked at the sleeping face of the person in his arms with tenderness in his eyes. Under the soft candlelight, the young man's facial features were delicate, and there was a faint blush on his white skin. Shang Junlin knew how beautiful the young man's cheeks were when they were dyed red. The young man's eyelashes were very long, and they drooped down quietly, like a resting butterfly. Shang Junlin had lived in the palace since he was a child, so he had seen countless beauties. When he first ascended the throne, there were many who dared to approach him because of their beauty. He only felt disgusted when these people touched him. No matter how beautiful they were no different from ordinary people in his eyes, until he met Shunyu. For the first time, he had a strong desire to touch someone. For the first time, he wanted to hold someone in his arms. For the first time, he wanted to trap someone and not let them leave at all costs. Shunyu now took the initiative to find a comfortable sleeping position in his arms, and he was also used to sleeping with the person in his arms. After confirming that Shunyu was asleep, Shang Junlin sat up gently and took out the letter under his pillow. He opened the letter with half expectation and half apprehension, then slowly took out the pink letter and opened it. What came into view was a beautiful hairpin-style small regular script. Shang Junlin was stunned. He had seen Shen Yu's semicursive script, cursive script, and running regular script, but it was the first time he saw this kind of handwriting. "What are you secretly looking at, Your Majesty?" Shen Yu's voice sounded with a slight smile. Shang Junlin tilted his head and saw Shen Yu looking at him with a teasing look in his eyes. "You hasn't slept yet?" Shang Junlin blushed a little. "If I slept, wouldn't I not be able to see Your Majesty secretly reading my letter in the middle of the night?" Shen Yu propped herself up. Her long hair flowed down her shoulders like a waterfall. The young man's face appeared particularly gentle under the candlelight. Only his eyes were shockingly bright, like stars shining in the dark night sky. Shang Junlin turned his body slightly and covered Shen Yu's eyes with one hand. "You wrote it. We like it very much." Shen Yu's eyes were covered, so he couldn't see the man's face that was getting redder and redder. He blinked, and his eyelashes fluttered like feathers across the man's palm. The numbness spread from her palm to her heart. "It's good that Your Majesty likes it." Shen Yu was also very nervous when he wrote the letter. His literary talent seemed to have lost its effectiveness. In the end, he only left a few simple and straightforward sentences. "A Yu's handwriting is very beautiful. It's as beautiful as a Yu's." Shang Junlin sighed softly. Shen Yu removed the hand covering his eyes, sat up, and faced Shang Junlin. "I only use this handwriting when I write to Your Majesty. It was only displayed in front of one person, and only bloomed for one person." His eyes were full of sincerity. Some emotions were hidden in a very deep place, and were faintly revealed to the outside world. Shang Junlin's Adam's apple bobbed. He forcefully pulled Shen Yu into his arms. "We're very happy, you. We'll never let you down." Shen Yu raised and lowered his hands. After a few times, he seemed to have made up his mind. He wrapped his arms around the man's waist. "Your Majesty, you promised me. You can't go back on your words." "How can we go back on our words?" Shang Junlin lowered his head and kissed Shen Yu's hair. The faint fragrance lingered, and his entire heart calmed down. Shen Yu leaned on the man's shoulder and slowly closed his eyes. If it was Shang Junlin, he was willing to try again. Looking at his life, he was bumpy when he was young. After he became an adult, he had been deceived. Even after he died, he was told that his life was used to help others. Shen Yu was never willing to accept his fate easily. Therefore, when he knew that he was deceived in his previous life, he destroyed Prince Yu's dream of ascending the throne. In this life, he wouldn't let the ending in the book happen. If he could destroy the ending once, he could destroy it a second time. The only exception was Shang Junlin. The cruel and heartless tyrant in the book, who caused the people of Dahuan to live in misery, wasn't as the book said. On the contrary, he was diligent and loved the people. He also gave Shen Yu a sense of reality. On a day off, Imperial Dr. Sun brought a pot of good wine and visited a colleague. It was Imperial Dr. Chen, who had the same rank as Imperial Dr. Jiyu in the Imperial Hospital. Imperial Dr. Chen was a slightly fat middle-aged man. He looked very amiable. Because of his kind face, he was very popular. Originally, Imperial Dr. Wu was retiring, and Imperial Dr. Chen was supposed to be the new Imperial Doctor. "What brings Imperial Dr. Wu here? Please come in." Imperial Dr. Chen smiled before speaking. He was so polite that no one could find any fault with him. "Recently, I found a pot of good wine and specially brought it for you to taste." Imperial Dr. Sun raised his hand that was holding the wine pot. The smile on Imperial Dr. Chen's face deepened. He loved wine, but he couldn't drink when he was on duty in the Imperial Hospital. He could only drink a little during his break. When the two entered the room, Imperial Dr. Chen ordered the servants to serve wine and dishes. "If you don't mind, Imperial Dr. Sun can stay and drink a few cups with me." Imperial Dr. Sun came with a purpose, so he naturally wouldn't refuse. Then it would be impolite for me to refuse. Imperial Dr. Chen asked the servants to set up a table in the small courtyard and sat down face to face with Imperial Dr. Sunday. After 3 rounds of wine, Imperial Doctor Sun was a little drunk. He thought about his purpose of coming here and said, "There is one thing, but I don't know if I should say it." "What is it?" "If it's convenient, you can say it. Maybe I can help you solve your problems. It's about the Imperial Hospital. You should know that Imperial Dr. Wu is retiring soon. There are only a few people who are qualified to be the next Imperial Doctor. If it was someone else, I wouldn't say anything, but I feel that it's not worth it for you." Imperial Dr. Sun was filled with righteous indignation. The smile on Imperial Dr. Chen's face disappeared. "Oh? In fact, everyone in the Imperial Hospital thinks that you are the most qualified to be the next Imperial Doctor. Whether it is qualifications or other things, if the one who sits in that position is you, no one will have any objections. But someone took a shortcut and used his relationship with the nobles in the palace to take your position." Imperial Dr. Sun drank a mouthful of wine. His words seemed to be defending Imperial Dr. Chen. The current Imperial Doctor is still Imperial Dr. Wu. It's not good to jump to conclusions about the future. Imperial Dr. Sun should be careful with your words. Imperial Dr. Chen put down the wine cup. Imperial Dr. Sun looked at Imperial Dr. Chen's face and felt that the other party was not very happy. He thought that his words had an effect, so he continued, "No matter what, the one who sits in that position should be someone like you. And don't think that I am talking nonsense. I can guarantee that everything I said is true." It was Imperial Dr. Wu who said it himself. Imperial Dr. Sun looked around and lowered his voice. "Then what do you want me to do?" Imperial Dr. Chen calmly asked. "At least, you can't let someone who is not worthy sit in that position." Imperial Dr. Sun stated his final goal. "I know. Imperial Dr. Sun is drunk. Come, help Imperial Dr. Sun to rest." The servants came over and helped Imperial Dr. Sun up. Ignoring his protests, they took him to the guest room. When Imperial Dr. Sun's figure disappeared, a young man came out of the corner. It was Imperial Dr. Jiyu. Imperial Dr. Gu's mood was very complicated. He knew that Imperial Dr. Sun had always been at odds with him, but he didn't think that the other would do such a thing to deal with him. If he really succeeded, the people of the Imperial Hospital would be divided and it would bring great trouble. It's good that teacher has good eyes and saw that this person has bad intentions. He told us to guard against him. I don't know who else he went to visit other than me. Imperial Dr. Chen looked with disgust in the direction that Imperial Dr. Sun left. I don't know how I provoked him. Imperial Dr. Jiyu grimaced. Since I entered the Imperial Hospital, I have been targeted everywhere. This is not your fault. The villain is used to being jealous of the virtuous. Imperial Dr. Chen patted his shoulder. Don't worry. Teacher has told us. We will help you in the future. There were several students of Imperial Dr. Wu in the Imperial Hospital. Imperial Dr. Chen was one of them. Imperial Dr. Wu knew the conduct of these students. Before he talked to Imperial Dr. Jiyu alone, he had talked with these students. Compared to fighting for power, his students preferred to study medicine. They didn't have any objections to their teacher's actions. You don't have to worry about Imperial Dr. Sunday teacher will take care of it. Thank you. Imperial Dr. Jiyu cupped his hands and thanked him. Because he was young, Imperial Dr. Wu took good care of him when he first entered the Imperial Hospital. Later, because he was indeed talented in medical skills, several of Imperial Dr. Wu's students gradually became good friends with him. If you want to thank us, why don't you take out your new medical book and discuss it with us? When I finish, I will ask for your advice. Imperial Dr. Sun didn't know that he thought he could provoke the conflict between the other Imperial doctors in the Imperial Hospital and Imperial Dr. Jiyu, but the first one to be dealt with was himself. By the way, have you seen the popular return to spring in the capital recently? It's your day off. Why don't you go and see it together? In addition to loving wine, Imperial Dr. Chen also liked to watch opera. This time, the people who watched the new opera were full of praise. Imperial Dr. Chen had been itching for a long time. Imperial Dr. Jiyu couldn't refuse and went with Imperial Dr. Chen. Shunyu wanted to experience the feeling of sitting in the crowd and watching opera. He found a day when Shang Junlin wasn't busy and went out with him. There were many people in the opera. In order not to cause a sensation, Shen Yu and Shang Junlin disguised themselves. Shen Yu changed into a red robe this time. He was flamboyant like fire. His facial features were bright. Not only was his aura not suppressed by the red robe, but he was even more beautiful that people couldn't take their eyes off him. Shang Junlin looked at Shen Yu in a red robe. His eyes were full of unconcealable amazement and strong possessiveness. He didn't want others to see Shen Yu like this at all. She was about to tie Shen Yu's hair with a waterfall behind her head. Shang Junlin walked over. "Give it to me." She handed the hair tie and ivory comb to Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin used one hand to tuck Shen Yu's long hair behind his back. The long black hair slid through his fingers. He held the ivory comb in his other hand and gently combed it. The ivory comb went into the black hair and smoothed it to the end. Shen Yu touched his hair behind his back. "Your Majesty, do you know how to do it?" Shang Junlin proved with his ability that not only did he know how to do it, but he also knew how to do it very well. The hair he combed was no worse than Shi's. Shen Yu looked at himself in the bronze mirror and asked curiously, "When did your Majesty learn how to comb people's hair?" Shi covered her mouth and laughed. She still remembered that not long ago, the high and mighty emperor clumsily learned how to comb people's hair. "I learned it from your maid. How is my skill?" Shang Junlin held the ivory comb and looked at him with a smile. "Very good." Shen Yu's eyes were full of praise. "I will comb Yu's hair in the future, okay?" Chapter 110. As long as your Majesty doesn't find it troublesome. Shen Yu looked at himself in the mirror again. The bronze mirror was polished until it was shiny, clearly reflecting the young man's appearance. With snow-white skin and black hair, he looked like an elegant young master in this chaotic world. How can it be troublesome to comb Yu's hair? Shang Junlin walked over and lifted a strand of hair on his shoulder. He said in a half-joking tone, "Yu is so beautiful that I don't want others to see it." "What should I do?" Shen Yu always knew that his appearance wasn't bad. It wasn't the first time he had been praised for his appearance, but when Shang Junlin said it in a possessive tone, his heart still trembled. "Then your Majesty must keep an eye on me so that I won't be snatched away by others." Shen Yu's lips curled up, his eyes mischievous. "I won't give anyone a chance. Yu can't go anywhere except by my side." Thinking of the possibility of Shen Yu standing beside others, Shang Junlin's lips flattened. Shen Yu comforted him with ease. "Your Majesty, don't worry. I won't go anywhere except by your Majesty's side." Shen Yu sat in front of the bronze mirror and painted his face. After a while, his eyebrows and eyes looked very different from before. His facial features were brighter and more flamboyant. If one looked closely, they could still see some similarities with his original appearance. Shang Junlin also changed his appearance and changed into a navy blue uniform. Shen Yu walked around him in a circle. "Your Majesty also looks good in this color." Shang Junlin rarely wore colors other than black. Shen Yu was used to seeing him in black. Suddenly seeing him in another color gave him a sense of novelty. Shang Junlin's facial features were handsome, belonging to the kind of beauty that was very oppressive. The lines of his face were sharp. After the disguise, the original sharpness was neutralized, and it was no longer as unbearable as before. The blue uniform suppressed his aura, giving people a kind of illusion of gentleness. Although his face didn't change much, people wouldn't associate him with the emperor of the Great Huan dynasty. The two of them got into the carriage and left the palace. Shen Yu was also very familiar with this carriage. When he got on, he found that the place where he sat was covered with a soft blanket. Some time ago, Shen Yu felt that it was too hot, so he asked Shang Junlin to remove the blanket. "Wait for this year's autumn hunt. I'll make a tiger pelt for you." Shang Junlin sat beside Shen Yu and rubbed his earlobe. "Will His Majesty give me whatever I want?" Shen Yu was looking out of the window, but when he heard the question, he turned around. "As long as Yu asks, we will do it for Yu." Shang Junlin looked at him with determination. Shen Yu had no doubt that Shang Junlin could do what he said, but he was still stunned by the man's answer without hesitation. "If His Majesty continues to spoil me like this, I will become arrogant." Shun Yu collected his thoughts and looked at Shang Junlin seriously. I give you the right to be arrogant. The hand that was rubbing his earlobe changed to caressing his cheek. Shun Yu's eyes curved slightly. This is what His Majesty said. His Majesty, don't regret it in the future. Falling in love with a Yu, we will never regret it. The weather turned cold, and the number of people on the street suddenly increased. The carriages moved in an orderly manner on the street. When they arrived at the opera house, Shun Yu and Shang Junlin got off the carriage. There were people coming and going outside the opera house. People gathered in groups of 3 to 5, talking as they walked inside. The favorite concubine of a certain emperor of Dahuan loved to listen to opera. The emperor followed suit, and the opera industry of Dahuan developed greatly during that time. After a few generations, the favorite concubine and the emperor of Dahuan had become characters in the opera. The opera was also deeply rooted in the hearts of the people of Dahuan. The 100 Opera House was an old opera house that had been passed down for several generations. The best opera troupe in the opera house was specially for the nobles to enjoy. The other opera troupes performed for the common people. If they were favored by a certain influential person, they could also perform in the influential person's house. The first floor was the hall. Most of the common people would choose to listen to the opera here. The second floor was a private room separated by a partition. Each guest had a separate space. It was most suitable for influential people or tycoons to bring their family or friends here. Will the 2 guests be on the first floor or in a private room? The opera will start in a quarter of an hour. You 2 came at the right time. Otherwise, you will have to wait for a while. I want a private room on the second floor. Okay, please follow me. Shun Yu and Shang Junlin walked into the private room on the second floor. The space was not big, but the decoration was very delicate. There were some snacks on the table in the middle. Because there were only 2 of them, they asked for a private room for 2. Do the 2 of you need someone to wait on you? No need. A quarter of an hour later, the story of returning to spring officially started. Shun Yu and Shang Junlin sat together and watched. He was the one who wrote the skeleton of the opera. He knew the development of the story very well. What he saw more was the reaction of the audience below. They chose a very good position. Whether it was the stage below or the people who were listening to the opera, they could all see it. A Yu's opera is very well arranged, Shang Junlin said softly. Your Majesty, do you think there will be officials coming to watch? If Shun Yu remembered correctly, there were many officials in Dahuan who liked to watch operas. Yes. Look over there. That's the Minister of Revenue and the Minister of Works. Shang Junlin pointed in a direction. Shun Yu looked over. Sure enough, the Minister of Revenue and the Minister of Works were wearing casual clothes and sitting in the crowd on the first floor. Are they so close in private? They could even get together to watch operas. It turns out that they are not that close. Before the Ministry of Works could support itself, it was not an exaggeration to say that their relationship was like fire and water. Later, when a Yu proposed the idea of sponsorship, they became closer and closer, Shang Junlin explained. Could it be that their relationship is not good because the Ministry of Works has been asking the Ministry of Revenue for money? Shun Yu felt that it was a little inconceivable. From the looks of it, that is the case. Is there any progress from the Ministry of Works? Ever since the first cement road was paved, Shun Yu had not paid attention to the follow-up for a long time. The second road is almost finished. There will be results after a while. The Ministry of Works said that if this plan is feasible, they can gradually replace the roads in the capital with cement roads. They also discovered that cement can be used for construction. They used cement to build a small house, and it is said that it is very sturdy. Shun Yu was just asking. After hearing the reply, he no longer cared about this matter. There were so many people in the Ministry of Works. It was impossible that they could not handle this matter well. Shun Yu looked around and looked at the second floor. He saw a familiar face again. The Prime Minister is also here. He even brought along Jiang Huiqing, He Chengyu, and Fang Jiari. In order to not attract attention, Fang Jiari was dressed as a man. The Prime Minister thinks highly of He Chengyu and the other 2. He even praised them in the memorial he presented yesterday. How could he not think highly of them? With the addition of these 3 people, the Prime Minister's daily workload could be reduced by more than half. The Prime Minister dreamed that one day, all the officials in Da Juan could be like these 3 people. He did not ask for anything else, but at least they should do their job well. As a result, many officials who had been promoted by the Prime Minister could not do their job well. They also stared at the power of others all day long. They could not do anything, and they always caused a mess for the Prime Minister to clean up. Sometimes, I feel that the Prime Minister went against the aristocratic families because he could not stand the style of these aristocratic family officials. Shang Junlin thought of some past events and could not help but laugh. The Prime Minister's family should not be low. It is not low. In the beginning, his relationship with the aristocratic family officials was not so bad. Otherwise, he would not have been able to enter the cabinet so easily. After becoming the Prime Minister, he had to clean up the mess made by the aristocratic families every few days. Over time, the relationship between the 2 sides became more and more strained. Shang Junlin was naturally happy to see this scene. The Prime Minister was listening to the play seriously. He originally did not plan to come. Even if it was a rest day, he still had a lot of things to deal with. It was Jiang Huiqing who suggested to him that he should properly relax after being busy. He thought about the countless days and nights he had been busy with official affairs and deeply felt that he should take a break. Therefore, he brought the 3 people to listen to Return to Spring. He often went in and out of the palace, so of course, he knew the real purpose of this play. He brought the 3 people out to test their political acumen. During the intermission, he poured himself a cup of tea and asked, "Do you have any thoughts after watching this play? This play alludes to the incident in Subei, right? The embezzlement of disaster relief supplies just happens to match up with the robbery. The imperial court has always been discussing the matter of donations. Now that the common people know the significance of donations through the play, once the imperial court officially announces this policy, there will be no unwarranted suspicion." It was not just in the capital. There were also theaters in other places performing this play. Moreover, because the play itself was sufficiently attractive, more and more people came to watch. The Prime Minister nodded approvingly. This time, the imperial examination had finally picked out some good seedlings. He was secretly planning how to quickly nurture the 3 of them. With one more person to share the burden on his shoulders would be lighter. During the intermission, the common people below began to discuss. The corrupt officials are too much. There are so many soldiers and common people at the border who are still waiting for food to save their lives. They actually embezzled the food and money. That's right. With my bad temper, I want nothing more than to rush up and blow his head off. Lao Niang and the others have already begun to prepare food. I hope they can make it in time. Otherwise, with the enemy at the border, the soldiers at the border won't even have food to eat. How will they protect the country? That's why they say the corrupt officials have no heart. They don't even think about it. If the enemy invades, even if they have so much money, what's the use? Say, if Lao Niang can prepare food and send it to the border, can't we do the same? Subei is in a drought. Lord Fang was ordered to provide relief, but he was met with bandits. Right now, we don't know what the situation is over there. Can we do something for Subei? If we can successfully send the food to Subei, I'm willing to donate half of my family's food. Beyond Subei is the Northern Desert. The Northern Desert has been eyeing the Great Huan for a long time. If His Majesty hadn't beaten them until they were afraid, how could they have so easily stopped? It's only been a few years since the Great Huan has been peaceful. If something happens to Subei, the Northern Desert will definitely make a comeback. We can't let the Northern Desert have a chance to invade the south. Just like Lao Niang said, to protect the country, everyone should do their part. Moreover, many little drops make an ocean. Although our abilities are limited, what if we have 100, 1,000, or 10,000 people? We can at least make a difference. That's right. Does anyone know anyone from the government? Can we express our views to the imperial court? The discussion below became more and more heated. Shunyu picked up the teacup and took a sip. The corners of his mouth curved slightly. He had already achieved half of his goal. Did you rehearse for this scene in the beginning? Shang Junlin also heard the discussion and a complicated look flashed through his eyes. Your Majesty, what I want is not an order from the imperial court, but an opportunity for the people to fight for themselves. How lucky I am to have Yu's help. Shang Junlin hugged Shen Yu and planted a light kiss on the side of his face. Chapter 111. As a king, Shang Junlin certainly knew the difference between the two. I originally thought that you arranged this play just to make the people more accepting of the donations. I didn't expect that there was a deeper meaning. You asked me to delay the time, so you were waiting for this opportunity. Shen Yu nodded. I always feel that those people have a backup plan. They stole a batch of supplies, so they definitely won't watch us collect enough supplies to send to Subei again. Shang Junlin, what I'm most worried about is that the people from the northern desert have infiltrated the officials of Subei. According to the news from the hidden dragon guards, they haven't found any traces of the people from the northern desert. Shen Yu, the northern desert is undoubtedly the most beneficial to the disaster in Subei. Without the threat of the northern army, Subei is undoubtedly in the bag for the northern desert. Your Majesty thinks that it's not strange that the people from the northern desert are involved, but I'm more inclined to think that it's done by someone in Dahuan. Your Majesty, don't forget that the King of Yu is still in the secret prison. Shang Junlin, Yu suspects that it's the people behind the King of Yu? Shen Yu, if the King of Yu wants that position, food, gold, and silver are all indispensable. Your Majesty, did you send people to the King of Yu's fief? The King of Yu had been detained in the capital for so long, but there was no movement in his fief. This was an abnormal thing. Your Majesty can use the donation as an excuse to investigate the King of Yu's fief. After a cup of tea's time, the second half of the play continued. The discussion below slowly disappeared, and everyone's attention turned back to the play. On the other side, in a private room. Noticing that Imperial Physician Ji Yu was obviously not in the right state, Imperial Physician Qian poured a cup of tea for him. What are you thinking about? I seem to have seen an acquaintance just now. Imperial Physician Ji Yu paused for a moment and took the teacup. I don't know if I'm mistaken. Is it your good friend? Why don't you invite them over for a chat? Imperial Physician Ji Yu shook his head. No need, I think they don't want to be disturbed. Seeing this, Imperial Physician Qian didn't say anything more. After the play ended, there was a thunderous applause below the stage. This ending is really satisfying. Corrupt officials should be beheaded in public like this. Qiong Niang has finally reunited with her lover after going through untold hardships. I am satisfied that our lovers have finally gotten married. Mother Chang's efforts were not in vain. The wicked were punished, and the good were rewarded. The disaster was resolved in time, and the enemies who wanted to take advantage of the situation were defeated. How satisfying. There were both men and women who came to watch the show. Both sides focused on different things, but no matter which side, they were all very satisfied with the ending. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin walked out of the opera house. Along the way, they could hear the discussions of the people around them. Apart from the story itself, the most talked about part of the story was the actions of Wu Niang in the play. Chang Niang was the embodiment of all the beauty of women in the world. She had the tenderness of a woman, but she also had the courage of a man. She dared to say and do what she wanted, and she was not afraid of difficulties. She had touched countless people. Since Chang Niang in the play succeeded, does this mean that this method is feasible? I am also thinking about this problem. You and I are both businessmen, so we know that the treatment of businessmen in the Great Huan dynasty is much better than that of other courts. In the play, Chang Niang's situation was so difficult, but she still succeeded in the end. Because of their actions, the situation of the businessmen at that time was changed. If we can contribute to the Great Northern Sioux, can we also change the way the world views businessmen? Scholars, farmers, businessmen, and businessmen, the ideas passed down from generation to generation were not easy to change. Even if the Great Huan dynasty was not harsh on businessmen, because of all kinds of inherent ideas, the status of businessmen was not high. No matter how much money they had in their hands, if they didn't spend a lot of money to bribe people, they could easily lose a lot of money. Even if they had to spend money to buy peace of mind, buy protection, they were willing to do so. However, in most cases, after the money was spent and the relationship was good, the other party could still back out at the last minute. Shun Yu's sponsorship and donations could prevent this from happening. Shun Yu's play had already been performed in the capital for several days, and local opera troupes had also started to rehearse this play. For each troupe, as long as there were people watching, it was the same no matter what they rehearsed. There were also storytellers who saw a business opportunity telling stories about Changniang in restaurants and tea houses. The guests liked to listen, and they were happy to tell more. After a few days of fermentation, the government received a petition from the people. Not only the government, but also the Supreme Court, the Ministry of Revenue, and several other places received the petition. In the morning court, the Minister of Revenue directly took out the petition, reporting to Your Majesty, this official has received some letters from the people. Several other officials also stood up, reporting to Your Majesty, this official has also received them. Bring them to me to see. Outside the palace, Yingxing Tower. Yang Zheng and more than a dozen businessmen were sitting in a private room. The leader was an elegant man in his 30s. They had just written a joint petition and handed it to the government. On the other side sat a few ordinary people, all of whom were well-known people in the neighborhood. They had gathered here to jointly write a petition. Everyone, don't worry. I have some friendship with an official in the Ministry of Revenue. He said that the Minister of Revenue will inform Your Majesty of our request today, the elegant man said. We naturally believe in young Master Jin's words. The others also spoke one after another. Young Master Jin had a lot of say among the businessmen in the capital. He was reliable, and everyone trusted him. This time, everyone had also recommended him to be in charge of this matter. After comforting the people, young Master Jin walked to Yang Zheng's side and said in a low voice, If you hadn't told me this, I wouldn't have dared to agree to this matter. Here's a toast to you. Brother Jin, you're too serious. When I first came to the capital, I received your help, but I wasn't able to thank you properly. This time, I only told you some information that I know. It's nothing much, Yang Zhang replied. When Shun Yu had wanted to decline the plan, he had asked Shang Junlin to conceal this information again. Unlike the officials, if the businessmen and ordinary people didn't have any connections, they wouldn't be able to find out about the imperial court's information. Yang Zhang knew about it because the Ministry of Works had accidentally leaked some information to him. There was also another reason. Yang Zheng had originally been waiting for the imperial court's order to donate a sum of money. He didn't expect that in the end, they would take the initiative to propose this matter. However, this was also good. It would be more beneficial for them and the imperial court. When Yang Zheng first saw Return to Spring, he had some vague guesses in his heart. Later, when he talked about this matter on the streets and alleys, his thoughts became clearer. Later, when he talked about cooperation with Shopkeeper Shu seemed to have inadvertently mentioned it. He knew then that this was an excellent opportunity for him to enter the inner circle of the capital's businessmen. The small groups of businessmen in every place were xenophobic. In a place like the capital, it was even more so. He had been here for a while, but he still hadn't really integrated into the group until now. He knew in his heart who Shopkeeper Shu was. The information that Shopkeeper Shu revealed must have been from the people behind Shopkeeper Shu. With an accurate answer, Yang Zheng privately looked for young Master Jin. After the two of them talked in detail, he met the most important person in the capital's business circle for the first time. If this matter went smoothly, he could use this matter to slowly gain a foothold. The waiting time always seemed exceptionally long. The sun gradually rose. Finally, a servant ran in with a happy face. That person has replied. His Majesty has agreed. Everyone's face lit up with joy. That's great. After this, our business should have fewer restrictions. After sitting down to discuss the specific matters of the donation, the group of people went back to make arrangements. Young Master Jin walked at the back with a relaxed smile on his face. He was a natural businessman and had always been sensitive to the trend of the imperial court. But this time, if it weren't for Yang Zhang's reassurance, he wouldn't have dared to take such a big risk. That day, when he helped Yang Zheng out of trouble, it was just a matter of convenience. He didn't expect that it would leave him with such a great good karma. Shun Yu was taking care of the flowers in Yuzhong Palace. Except for a pot sent by Imperial Physician Ji Yu, the rest were sent by Shang Junlin. There were precious varieties, and there were also some that were sent purely because of their good growth. Shun Yu was not like Shang Junlin, who had a lot of free time every day. Every few days, he would personally take care of these flowers and plants. He would water them, loosen the soil, cut the branches, and so on. Mu Shi stood to the side with a clean handkerchief. Young master, shopkeeper Shu sent a message saying that he has preliminarily discussed the cooperation with young master Yang. He also leaked the news to young master Yang according to your instructions. I heard that in the past 2 days, the merchants and people in the capital have written to the government together. There should be a conclusion today. This show has been going on for so long, it's time to end it. Official Li of the Ministry of Revenue only knew what the Imperial Court was planning today. This matter was not disclosed to the outside world except for the Minister of Revenue, the Prime Minister, and a few other ministers. Even what Shun Yu told Yang Zheng was only a part of it. After the court, Official Li anxiously paced back and forth in the study. Finally, he made up his mind. He picked up a pen and hurriedly wrote something. Without waiting for the ink to dry, he put it in his pocket and walked out. The study door was opened, and Official Li's eyes widened in surprise. Where do you want to go, Official Li? The visitor coldly raised the corner of his mouth. Or rather, who do you want to send a message to? I don't know what you're talking about. You don't need to know. Come, take him away. Official Li was quietly taken away. After the morning court, Shang Junlin stayed behind with the Prime Minister and the Minister of Revenue to discuss the details of the donation. Eunuch Meng walked in from outside and said in a low voice, Your Majesty, the spy in the Ministry of Revenue has been caught. Hand it over to the Supreme Court to investigate. I want to see who is plotting against Dahuan. When Shang Junlin returned to Yuzhong Palace, Shun Yu was still tending to the flowers. The hidden dragon guards caught a spy in the Ministry of Revenue. I handed him over to the Supreme Court. I hope they will be able to get something out of him. Shang Junlin walked over. I feel that it's not normal for it to be so peaceful now. Every time something happens in the Imperial Court, there will always be people secretly spreading unfavorable rumors about Your Majesty. Did Your Majesty find out who did it? Shun Yu put down the small shovel in his hand. I did. Don't worry, Shun Yu smiled. If they want to do anything this time, they will lose more than they gain. Shun Yu knew what those people would say without thinking. They would just blame Shang Junlin for the natural and man-made disasters. They might be waiting for the best time to act, but they didn't know that Shun Yu was also waiting for them to act. Not only would he not let these people get what they wanted, but he would also return the dirty water that they had slandered Shang Junlin in the past. Yu has taken good care of these flowers. Shang Junlin picked up the small shovel on the stone table and loosened the soil for the flowers that had not been loosened yet. I naturally have to take good care of the flowers sent by Your Majesty. Chapter 112. The two took care of the flowers and plants for a while. Shang Junlin wasn't interested in these things at first, but Shun Yu liked them, so he occasionally helped. After a few times, he had a certain understanding of these flowers and plants. In the beginning, he didn't know how to do anything. Shang Junlin had never taken care of flowers and plants in his life. When he was young, he was busy surviving in the harem. When he grew up, he entered the battlefield, so it was even more impossible for him to have time for this kind of romantic activity. When he ascended the throne, he took over the mess left by the previous emperor. In addition, the external enemies hadn't been eliminated yet, so the burden of the entire Dahuan was on his shoulders. Every day, he was busy with political affairs, which almost took up most of his time. Later, everything in Dahuan was on the right track. He had also passed the age of enjoying life. His life was as boring as ever, until Shun Yu entered the palace. Like a stone thrown into the water, it created circles of ripples. Like a bright moon, it lit up his boring life. Shang Junlin had never thought that the two of them would enjoy such a leisurely day in the afternoon like now. Your Majesty's current technique is much better than before. Shen Yu looked at the Junling that Shang Junlin was taking care of and joked, Your Majesty seems to like this Junling very much. Every time, you would take care of it alone. That was because he didn't want Shen Yu to take care of the flowers and plants sent by others. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent so many flowers and plants to Yuzhong Palace to distract Shen Yu. A Yu cares about it, so Zhen naturally also cares more. Shang Junlin pursed his lips. Shen Yu didn't expose his little thoughts. Does Your Majesty still remember the first time you said you would help me loosen the soil for the flowers? You almost broke the roots. I took care of that pot of flowers for a few days before I managed to grow it back. It's this pot. Shen Yu pointed at the pot of flowers beside his hand. I remember. Shang Junlin smiled as he recalled what happened at that time. At that time, Jin was thinking that if this pot of water couldn't be saved, Jin would find an opportunity to ask for it from you. Then, Jin would find a pot of water that was exactly the same and say that it was saved. He still remembered the sadness that flashed across Shen Yu's face at that moment. He didn't want to see such an expression on Shen Yu's face, even if it was just a pot of flowers in his eyes. Since his Yu cared, he would find a way to make Yu not feel sad about this matter. So at that time, His Majesty had even thought of the worst-case scenario. Shen Yu also smiled. His Majesty is a quick learner. Later on, he did not harm these flowers and plants. Shang Junlin was a person who would do everything to the extreme once he made up his mind. Shen Yu had personally witnessed how Shang Junlin changed from a person who didn't know how to do anything. He also knew that Shang Junlin didn't like the flowers sent by Jiyu Tai. It was because he saw that Shen Yu liked them that he didn't say anything. At most, he would send a large wave of flowers and plants to share the favor of Junling. It's also because Yu taught well. With such a diligent teacher like Yu, if the student still couldn't learn, then he could only be described as stupid. Shang Junlin finished loosening the soil and washed his hands in the basin beside him, drying them. The student has to be smart. Otherwise, no matter how good the teacher is, it's useless. Shen Yu also finished tidying up the last pot of flowers. Shang Junlin grabbed Shen Yu's hands, submerged them in the water, and washed them little by little. Then is Yu willing to teach Shen some other knowledge? For example, how can the student please the teacher to make the teacher more comfortable? Be willing to do more with the student. Your Majesty really doesn't forget about this matter at all times. Seeing that Shang Junlin's words were getting more and more out of hand, Shen Yu interrupted him. Shen Yu's hand was imprisoned in the man's palm. The man's calloused fingertips slid over the back of her hand, causing her to feel a burst of numbness. Shen Yu couldn't help but curl her fingers. Her soft palm was opened, and the man's bony hand forcefully submerged into her hand. From the palm of her hand to the gap between her fingers, the man's 10 fingers were tightly intertwined. Yu, Jin wants to kiss you. Shang Junlin stared at him with burning eyes. If Your Majesty wants to kiss me, then kiss me. Millimeter. The rest of her words were blocked by the man who suddenly approached her. Nibbling, licking, and sucking. The man's actions were as bold as always, forcefully cooperating with Shen Yu. She closed her eyes, and her long eyelashes cast a shadow under her eyes. Her eyelashes fluttered gently with her breathing, like a startled butterfly. After the kiss ended, Shang Junlin's forehead pressed against Shen Yu's. Both of their breaths were somewhat unstable. How was your student's performance this time? Shang Junlin chuckled. The man's voice was low and slightly trembling, knocking on Shen Yu's heart. Shen Yu's reaction was even more intense than before. Seeing this, Shang Junlin's eyes darkened even more. He sucked on Shen Yu's lips and asked, "Do you like your student acting like this?" Your Majesty, Millimeter. Without waiting for him to finish speaking, Shang Junlin had already kissed him again. Yu, Jin will build a greenhouse for you. He hid Shen Yu and his favorite flowers together. Shen Yu was immersed in a haze, and all of his senses were robbed. Vaguely, he seemed to hear Shang Junlin saying something, but the voice was separated by a vast white fog, so he couldn't hear it clearly. He could only reply with meaningless syllables. Shang Junlin hugged him even tighter. 2 days later, the imperial court issued the first government order to aid Subei. The people of the capital had been waiting for this moment for many days, and finally, they arranged their belongings to see what they could donate. Of course, Shunyu knew that the premise of donating was that it couldn't affect the normal lives of the people, and it also had to prevent officials from taking advantage of the opportunity to fill their pockets. After discussing with Shang Junlin, he decided to anonymously disclose the donation information. The people would be informed of the ins and outs of each donation. If the donation exceeded a certain amount, an official would visit the person, and after obtaining the consent of the owner, the donor's information would be disclosed to the public. The latter was specially set up for merchants and some aristocratic families. They could choose to use this opportunity to gain a good reputation for themselves, or they could choose to donate silently. The imperial court would give the same reward to both parties. It was undeniable that this was a huge and tedious project. Fortunately, Shang Junlin had selected many useful officials through the imperial examinations over the years. These people didn't have high official positions, and there weren't many of them in the imperial court. Most of them were still in the process of being transferred out, so they were just in time to handle this matter. The government order was quickly sent to various places, and the imperial court set up a special monitoring organization. The Prime Minister and the Minister of Revenue were temporarily in charge, and the officials who entered this organization were mostly from the capital. They were in groups of 2 or 3, and they would take people to various places in the Great Huan dynasty as quickly as possible to supervise the matters related to the donation. At the same time, the imperial court also arranged for special officials to explain the specific process of donating to the people. Because of the disaster in Subei, the entire Great Huan dynasty started to move. All the officials were nervous and expectant about this operation. They couldn't find similar precedents in the history books. If they succeeded, it would be a great achievement in the history books, but if not, Yang Zheng and the other merchants who first received the news were the first to act. They had already prepared supplies in advance, mostly food and other necessities. There was also a lot of gold and silver, which were donated under the witness of the officials sent by the imperial court. Next were the aristocratic families. After a few generations of accumulation, the wealth in their hands was immeasurable. The ordinary people were informed in advance, and they contributed as much as they could. Shunyu considered the possible problems and incorporated the solutions into the script. Those who had watched the story of Returning to Spring would at least have a certain understanding of donating. In addition, there were officials watching from the side, which greatly reduced the possibility of problems arising. The local officials cooperated with the people sent by the imperial court, and the donating process was carried out in an orderly manner. The hidden dragon guards were scattered all over the country, and they passed the news back to the capital. Subei. Official Fang and the others rested for a while, and they sent people to start the disaster relief. The food and other supplies they brought were temporarily enough, and Official Fang also received confirmation from the capital that more supplies would be sent over, so he didn't have to worry. After receiving the news, Official Fang also dared to do the disaster relief. First, they helped the people. Official Fang ordered people to give out porridge every day, and those who were able to work gathered together to do what they could. In the face of a disaster, the most important thing was not just disaster relief, but also the problem of post-disaster reconstruction. Subei's geographical location was too important, and it would be a major blow to Dahuan if it couldn't recover after the disaster. Official Fang took out a portion of the food and gave it to the Subei army. After all, before the imperial court people came, the people in Subei relied on the Subei army's salary to survive. Subei was very big, and Official Fang ignored the advice of the officials, and began to lead the people sent by the imperial court to help with the disaster relief. After leaving the biggest city in Subei, Official Fang and the others finally realized how serious the disaster was. There were people starving to death by the roadside at any time, and there was no harvest. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was hell on earth. It's already so serious, why are those people still saying that it's okay? Was this not a big deal? Will they only admit that the disaster is serious when all the people are dead? The younger officials saw this scene, and their eyes turned red. What was written in books or heard from other people was not as shocking as seeing it with their own eyes. They lived in the city and were almost deceived by the tranquility of the city. If Master Fang did not insist on bringing them out, Would they not know what they had done wrong until they returned to the capital? A shabbily dressed teenager saw them, and his eyes lit up. He crawled over on all fours. "Masters, please do me a favor and give me something to eat." The soft-hearted official subconsciously reached for the food, but was stopped by Official Fang. "Stop." Official Fang walked over and looked at the crowd of victims. He frowned and squatted down, ignoring the confusion of the official. "Can you still walk? If you can, follow me. Do you see over there? Our people are giving out porridge over there. If you stick to it, you'll get food. Not only will you be full today, you'll be full in the future." There was a small city in front of them, and it was also the destination of Official Fang's group. It was not far from here, and under normal circumstances, they could reach it in less than an hour. The teenager looked into the distance, and then looked at Official Fang, who was squatting down to look at him at the same level. His eyes were half puzzled and half conflicted. Official Fang nodded. "I'm not lying to you. Our people are already there. Look, isn't there smoke over there?" The teenager looked over again, and in a daze, he really did see smoke rising from the chimneys. "You look like a good person. I'll believe you this time." The teenager's face was covered in dirt, but his eyes were no longer lifeless. Instead, there was light in them. It was the look of someone who saw hope after despair. Official Fang suppressed the bitterness in his heart. "You have to follow. If you follow, you'll survive." The teenager nodded. Official Fang stood up, picked up a branch from the side, and handed it to the teenager. "This is for you." The teenager slowly stood up with the support of the branch. He looked at the backs of Official Fang's group, and slowly but firmly followed step by step. Chapter 113. "Sir, why didn't you let me give the child something to eat?" The official couldn't help but turn around. "Don't look back." Lord Fang's voice was still steady. "You can save him now, but you can't save him forever. What's more, didn't you see those refugees faintly gathering around us? If you save this one, what about the rest? There aren't many people. That's because you've only seen these people. Do you know why I told them to take the food and leave at night? It's because starving people don't have any rationality. They even eat people. Do you think you can leave this place safely if you take out the food?" Lord Fang's unhurried voice caused the official to break out in a cold sweat. Another official walked up and whispered, "I know you're soft-hearted, but being soft-hearted when you shouldn't be will only harm everyone. This official knows his mistake." The young official lowered his head in shame. In fact, before they left, Lord Fang had told them to ignore people begging for food on the road. He saw that the child was young and thought of his younger brother. He couldn't bear it and almost made a big mistake. Lord Fang sighed. He didn't have the heart to do that, but the goal of this trip was the entire Subei. He couldn't lose the big picture for the small. He knew that this trip would be difficult before he left, but His Majesty sent him because he trusted him. No matter what, he couldn't betray this trust. The small town in front of them was their second destination. Compared to the main city, the environment here was worse. But in the face of all this, none of the officials complained. They knew that just surviving was already the result of the people living here putting in the greatest effort. The official who came to greet them wasn't very dignified. His cheeks were thin and his complexion wasn't good. When he saw them, his eyes lit up. "You must be the disaster relief official sent by the Imperial Court. I didn't expect you to come in person. Please come in, there aren't many things in the residence. Please forgive me." The official residence of this small town was much smaller than the main city. The decorations were also very old. Lord Fang looked around but couldn't find a single valuable item. After a few simple greetings, Lord Fang went straight to the point. "How is the disaster situation here? I had people bring some supplies, but I don't know if it's enough." The official clearly knew the situation here and gave a concise summary of the disaster situation. Lord Fang's frown deepened as he listened. Strictly speaking, the disaster began at the end of April. Until now, there had not been a single drop of rain. Later, when they could no longer hold on, the government sold everything that could be sold for money and bought a batch of food from outside. Only then were they barely able to hold on until now. Didn't you say that the northern Jiangsu army's pay and provisions were used for emergency purposes? Most of the food is in the main city. For small towns and villages like ours, it's already a blessing to be able to get some. There's only so much food left, and it won't last long with so many people. Those who can leave have already left, but where can they escape to? It's the same situation in the entire Subei region. Didn't anyone escape to the northern part of Su? The minor official looked embarrassed. He gritted his teeth and continued, "It's impossible to escape outside. This official has a relative who wanted to leave Subei with his wife and daughter, but they disappeared before they could go far. They haven't been found yet. No wonder the imperial court didn't receive any news." Lord Fang pondered. It turned out that from the beginning, someone had deliberately prevented the people here from escaping. As long as there were disaster victims outside, they would be able to find out that something had happened in Subei. After understanding the situation, Lord Fang asked the minor official to gather people to distribute porridge outside the official residence. "Lord, there are many refugees outside the city gate." A gatekeeper came to report. "They should have followed us here." Lord Fang remembered that it was a young man he had met on the way here. "Should we let them into the city?" The county magistrate looked at the busy crowd. "Actually, it doesn't matter if they come in. There aren't many people in the city anyway. Some of these people might have originally come from the city. Let's check first. After making sure there's no problem, bring them here. You guys go and help." Lord Fang pointed at a few guards behind him. With the guards maintaining order, the people who came to get the porridge lined up in an orderly manner. The county magistrate's words were not wrong. There weren't many people left here. The people distributing the porridge moved quickly. Before long, the long line could be seen. "Are these the only people?" Lord Fang frowned as he looked at the people squatting at the side. Even though the city was not big, the number of people here was much less than he had expected. "Lord, I have a bedridden mother at home. I wonder if you can give a bowl of porridge to my bedridden mother?" "What are you thinking? Lord Fang is already kind enough to give porridge." The person beside him pulled him aside. He had heard that the imperial court had sent an official to provide disaster relief. The philanthropist official had even personally come to this small town to distribute porridge. Those who could come had all come. There were still some who couldn't, especially the childless elderly, who could only resign themselves to fate. "You, come here." Lord Fang called the official who had almost made a mistake on the way here. "Who is more familiar with this place? Bring him around and send some food to the bedridden elderly. You are really a philanthropist." The people who were eating porridge at the side heard this and couldn't help but put down the porridge and kowtow. "Since the imperial court has sent me here, I will save those who can be saved. Also, gather all the doctors here. I need some medicinal herbs." After major disasters such as droughts and floods, they were often accompanied by plagues. Before he came, the imperial physicians of the imperial hospital had given him some prescriptions to prevent plagues. He had to nip the problem in the bud. "That's right, let the doctors come with us to check on the situation of these people. If they have symptoms such as fever, they need to be treated together. Also, let everyone in the city clean themselves." Lord Fang gave out orders one by one. The people below followed and quickly acted. Knowing that the imperial court had sent enough food and wouldn't abandon them, the people also enthusiastically helped. Originally, he was going to arrange things for them to do. Before he came, Xinyu had specially told him that if possible, he should try his best to let the disaster victims use their own labor to exchange for food. Only in this way could the possibility of a riot be reduced. The disaster victims who came with Lord Fang and his group were also properly settled. After that, the youth found Lord Fang and kowtowed to him. "Lord Fang saved my life. I am willing to do anything for Lord Fang." "That's not necessary. You were able to come here by yourself." Lord Fang patted the shoulder of the youth who had been cleaned. "What are your plans for the future?" "I also want to be an official. I want to be a good official like Lord Fang." The youth's eyes were firm. Lord Fang's heart moved. "What about your family? Do you want to go find them?" "I don't have a family." The light in the youth's eyes dimmed. "I don't know where they are. Can you read? Lord Fang asked. The youth nodded. I can. I used to write letters for some people. Then are you willing to work for me? Lord Fang asked again. Can I? The youth was pleasantly surprised. As long as you want. However, it will be very tiring to work for me. I am willing. The youth nodded heavily. At night, Lord Fang wrote down the situation in Subei as usual and handed it to the black-clothed people hiding nearby. A few days later, Shang Junlin received a report from Subei. The situation in Subei is really strange. When Fang Jun arrived outside the main city, he found that the situation there was completely different from the main city. Shang Junlin picked up the report written by Lord Fang and showed it to Shen Yu. So the soldiers' provisions are all in the hands of the main city's officials. Only a small part of it is actually used by the people. How deeply did the late emperor's people infiltrate Subei? Shen Yu frowned. He knew too little about Subei. In his previous life, Subei had never been in any trouble. His attention was focused on the south. Until his death, Subei's existence was not high. When I led the Subei army to resist the northern desert, I was most seriously injured in Subei. At that time, the officials in Subei did not act, causing half of Subei's territory to be occupied by the northern desert. After I led the army to take back the territory, I fiercely attacked and separated the military and government in Subei. Now it seems that my purge was not thorough enough. Shang Junlin looked displeased. Shen Yu, those people actually let Lord Fang go elsewhere? Shang Junlin, Fang Jun can directly contact the Subei army. For the time being, they did not dare to go too far. Shen Yu, according to the information we know, those people should not be able to control the Subei army. Seeing that they only dared to kill people after they left Subei's territory, we know that they are afraid of the Subei army. As long as the Subei army was not infiltrated, there was nothing to be afraid of. Shang Junlin, Jiu Huai's side has also contacted the Subei army. They will first investigate internally to find the problematic people. Once they have dealt with the people planted in the Subei army and figured out their true purpose, they will take action to deal with them. Shen Yu, Your Majesty, did you find anything in King Yu's fief? I found clues about him secretly recruiting soldiers and buying horses. Shang Junlin was even more displeased at the mention of King Yu. He stroked Shen Yu's hair. Do you know why he approached you in the first place? When Shang Junlin suddenly mentioned this, Shen Yu was stunned. Rope in Zhunbei Marquis's residence? What's there to rope in Zhunbei Marquis's residence? Do you know what news I heard from Shang Junyue's fief? Shang Junyu raised a group of strategists, and the people in the group came from different places. One of the strategists who was good at divination once mentioned to Shang Junyu a maxim: whoever gets the son of Zhunbei Marquis will get the world. As long as he thought about how King Yu had coveted Shen Yu from the beginning, Shang Junlin could not suppress the murderous intent in his heart. Shen Yu's mind suddenly shook. He seemed to have thought of something, but also seemed to have not thought of anything. There was a trace of confusion in his eyes, so that's why he approached Shen Qingran while approaching me. How many secrets were hidden in the past life that was hidden under the timeline? It's just nonsense. Only people like King Yu would believe it. Don't think too much. I have already asked the hidden dragon guards to find a way to find that person. No matter why that person said those words, I will make him pay the price. Was deceived because of a sentence that he did not know was true or false. This time, was smart and did not fall for it. What if he was really deceived by King Yu? Shang Junlin did not dare to imagine that possibility. I won't think too much. What King Yu thinks has nothing to do with me. I know that Your Majesty will protect me. Isn't that right, Your Majesty? Shen Yu leaned on Shang Junlin's shoulder. At this moment, he was even more confused about what happened in his previous life. Chapter 114. Shen Yu was never afraid of fate. In his previous life, he was able to overcome the difficult situation. Regardless of whether his fate was intentional or not, he did not care. He always believed that he had to walk his own path. I will protect you. No one can hurt you. Shang Junlin hugged Shen Yu tightly. Does your majesty believe what that person said? Does your majesty believe in fate? Shun Yu leaned into the man's arms and asked softly. Fate? Shang Junlin snorted. I have never believed in such things. When I was young, everyone told me to accept my fate and become an abandoned prince. But I did not. I have never believed in the so-called fate. If you want something, don't fight for it yourself and blindly rely on fate. You might as well give it up from the beginning. Shun Yu gave a muffled laugh and said, Your Majesty is right. I have never believed in fate. When I was young, the servant girls and manservants in the Fu told me more than once that I didn't have this fate and that I had taken the title of Di Sun for nothing. At that time, I thought, so what? No matter how much Shen Qingran and Enyang are you think, the fact that the Di Sun is mine will not change. I must take this title. Not only that, I will stand at a height that they can't reach in the future and look down on them. The facts proved that Shun Yu did it. Whether in his previous life or this life, he stood at a position higher than Shen Qingran and his son. In his previous life, Shen Qingran was favored by Emperor Yu. When he met Shun Yu, he could only obediently shrink back. Shun Yu never wronged himself. In his previous life, he did not like Shen Qingran, so he did not force himself to be on good terms with him. Emperor Yu tried to repair their relationship several times, but he was rejected. Will your majesty think that I am not good? How can that be? Whatever a Yu does is right. Shang Junlin rubbed his cheek. Your majesty, if you catch that person, I want to see him. Maybe the reason why King Yu came to him in his 2 lives was because of this person. Shun Yu was somewhat concerned about this person. Shang Junlin, who originally wanted to catch the man and execute him on the spot, paused. In his heart, he did not want Shun Yu to come into contact with that man. Why would a Yu want to see him? He's just a con man. Since he accurately said the name son of Count North, perhaps he used to be active in the capital, or even went to Count North's residence. I'm curious about this person's identity. If he was a scammer, he could just let Shang Junlin deal with him. If he wasn't, that person might be able to solve some of his doubts. Alright, but when you go see him, you have to bring me along. Speaking of Shen Qingran, after Shang Junlin went to the imperial court the next morning, Shun Yu asked Mu Shi about the situation in Count North's mansion. His people had been keeping an eye on Count North's mansion, and any movement would be directly transmitted to Mu Shi. Shen Qingran has been very quiet recently. It seems that he has stopped making trouble. Concubine Yu has also been very quiet. Shun Yu was somewhat surprised by this result. It was reasonable to say that Shen Qingran and Concubine Yu did not seem like people who would obediently accept their fate. Otherwise, they would not have caused so much trouble in Count North's mansion. Shun Yu was right. How could Shen Qingran be willing to accept his current fate? He thought that he was from the modern era, so there was no reason that he could not beat some ancient people. How could he be willing to watch Shun Yu live better and better? When the summer was hot, he made a fuss and said that he wanted to see Count North, saying that he had something very important to give him. However, Count North did not want to see him at all. He had no choice but to use his trump card, saying that he could turn water into ice in the summer. As soon as he said this, before he could report it to Count North, the servant who delivered the message laughed. I say, second young master, you should save it. Now the imperial court sells ice at a low price. There is already a way to make ice. Don't you just find an excuse to trick Count North to come over? How is that possible? Shen Qingran did not believe it. He clearly remembered that Da Huan did not have a way to make ice. He hid this method because he wanted to have a better future for himself in the future. He did not tell anyone. He grabbed the servant's shoulder and said with a ferocious face, You lied to me, didn't you? Did you get benefits from Shun Yu and deliberately don't let me see my father? Second young master, the servant pulled his hand away with a cold face. I called you second young master, but you really think that you are the same as before. Why would I lie to you? You can casually ask and you will know whether I lied to you or not. If the imperial court did not sell ice at a low price, do you think that with your current situation, you can still use ice? Shen Qingran's face was blank for a moment. He had never thought about this problem. Since he transmigrated, he was favored because of his concubine mother. Everything he used was not inferior to Shen Yu, the son of the first wife. During this time, he had been thinking about how to change his current situation and how to climb to the top of Shen Yu's head again. He did not pay attention to the changes in his surroundings. Not only you, even the little ones can use ice. Who wouldn't be happy to spend some money and have a good sleep? The summer in the capital was really hot. In the past, when they had no money, they served their master during the day and could get some cool air. At night, there was no other way. It was so hot that they could not sleep. Let's talk about the matter of being instructed by the eldest young master. The eldest young master is now living in the palace. How could he instruct the people in the palace through the palace walls? Besides, Her Majesty will soon go to the summer palace to avoid the summer heat. As the only person in Her Majesty's harem, the eldest young master will naturally be busy preparing for the summer heat. How could he have the time to care about your business? The servant's words made Shen Qingran's face turn green and white. Especially the servant's words revealed that Shen Yu was living well now, which made him feel like he was sitting on pins and needles. The manservant was bullied here and didn't want to let Shen Qingran have a good time. When he went to reply to Sir Junbei, he only said that Shen Qingran had a bad attitude and didn't mention anything about the ice making. Going to the summer palace to avoid the summer heat. Shen Qingran remembered that Count North had taken him there when he was young. This time, Count North would definitely be able to go there, so this was his only chance. He wanted to tell the emperor in person that he was the one who should go to the palace. It was Shen Yu who took his position. He wanted to take this opportunity to put everything back to its original position. Unexpectedly, he waited and waited, but Count North did not take him to the summer palace. Instead, he took another concubine in the palace. Shen Qingran was so angry that he smashed his favorite ornament. After Mu Shi finished talking about this, she covered her mouth and smiled. Count North scolded him again after he went back. Since then, Shen Qingran has been quiet in Count North's palace. Count North is probably completely disappointed in his son. Shen Yu played with the empty teacup on the table. That's right. Young master, you don't know. After Duke Junbei returned from the summer palace, Shen Qingran made a big fuss. He even went to ask Duke Junbei why he didn't take him there. Did he not take his son seriously? Concubine Ayu finally made Duke Junbei feel a little guilty by being gentle. He was almost angered to death. Speaking of this, Mu Shi's eyes flashed with a touch of joy. When they were in Count North's palace, how arrogant were Shen Qingran and concubine Ayu? How many bad things did they do to her young master because of Count North's favor? Now, they finally got what they deserved. Shen Yu just thought of it and suddenly asked. After knowing the situation of the two, he no longer cared about this matter. He looked at the place where the flowers and plants were placed and raised his eyebrows. Did His Majesty send flowers again? Among the flowers and plants, there was one with a huge yellow flower bud. Shen Yu walked over to take a look, but he couldn't recognize the species. When was this pot sent here? Shen Yu looked at the flower and asked. It seems to be 2 days ago. Mu Shi's eyes flashed with confusion for a moment. I don't have much impression of it. I'll ask someone to ask. Mu Shi called the attendant in charge of taking care of the flowers and plants. The attendant saw the flower, thought for a moment, and replied, this flower was sent by Prince and heard that you like flowers and plants, so he specially found a precious one and sent it here. Princeton? Why would Princeton send flowers for no reason? Take the flowers away. In the future, only flowers sent by His Majesty will be placed here. Find a place to put the flowers sent by others. Shen Yu ordered lightly. Yes. The attendant hurried forward and moved the flowers away. Shen Yu looked around and didn't find any strange flowers and plants. I didn't do a good job and didn't carefully ask about this matter. Mu Shi bowed her head and admitted her mistake. Just be careful in the future. Tell the servants to pay more attention. Don't casually accept flowers and plants of unknown origin. There were too many people who could tamper with flowers and plants. Yes. Find someone to find out what kind of flower that pot is and find out the origin of the flower by the way. Yes. Young master, there's one more thing. Many people in the palace asked me if they could donate some money. Although it's not much, it's still a token of their sincerity. On the way back, Mushi asked. At that time, didn't you let many people in the palace watch return to spring? They've come to me several times, saying that they hope they can do something. At that time, after Return to Spring was rehearsed, in order to test the effect, Shinyu let them perform it several times in the palace. Shang Junlin didn't have any concubines in the harem, so Shinyu let the palace people listen to it. These people's reactions could also explain some people's reactions after watching it. It's okay to do a token of their sincerity, but tell them not to compare and just do their best. I'll leave this matter to you and little eunuch Meng. Shinyu also heard this news in Consort Dowager's palace. He couldn't help but be stunned. At the same time, he admired Shinyu even more. The donations outside the palace were managed by the imperial court. Shinyu in the palace couldn't completely ignore it. However, with Mu Shi and little eunuch Meng in charge, Shinyu didn't have to worry too much. Shang Junlin returned from the imperial court and heard eunuch Meng mention this matter on the way back. In my opinion, Guojuan's method is really wonderful. Right now, almost everyone is paying attention to the matters in Subei. Whatever those rascals want to do, they definitely won't succeed. Shang Junlin felt proud. You can always solve problems for Zhen. When they arrived at Yuzhong Palace, Shinyu was looking at the account book. It was the donation of the palace people after Mu Shi sorted it out and submitted it. What is you looking at? Shang Junlin waved his hand to signal the palace people to retreat and walked to Shinyu's side. Looking at the account book of the palace people's donation, it's more than I expected. Shinyu handed one of the account books to Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin took it and said, the imperial court also sorted out a copy. It's much more than expected. In order to reduce the time spent on the road, Zhen had them directly transport it from the original place to Subei. It's just to find something for the garrisoned troops to do. What's the reaction of the vassal kings? Perhaps they were scared in the capital during the new year. After the imperial court people went there, they did whatever they were told to do. They were also very concerned about the donation. Did you receive anything from the vassal kings? Shang Junlin didn't forget that before the vassal kings left the capital, they were ruthlessly ripped off by his Ayu. Chapter 115. The people they left in the capital sent me some things. I asked my subordinates to exchange them for food and medicinal herbs to donate. Shinyu thought of something important. Your Majesty, you must let them prepare for the plague in advance. After a disaster, there would be a plague. The former was a natural disaster and couldn't be resisted. The latter could be minimized through manpower. I have already instructed them. This time, I will send the imperial physicians who are experienced in this field. I have also recruited physicians who are experienced in this field. They will go to Subei with the next batch of relief supplies. Through this incident, Shang Junlin realized that a lot of things could be done by using the power of the people. In the past, they were too narrow-minded and ignored the huge power that could be used by the people. If it wasn't for Shinyu mentioning it, he was afraid that the disaster relief this time wouldn't have gone so smoothly. Your Majesty, is there any new progress regarding Fei Meng? After this drought, if there was an epidemic, would it be related to Fei Meng? Shang Junlin shook his head. The hidden dragon guards are investigating, but there are very few clues. Every time, they will be cut off at the most crucial point. I am afraid of alerting the enemy, so I didn't let them make too big of a move. Your Majesty, which imperial physician are you sending to Subei this time? Is he reliable? Shinyu asked. It's Imperial Physician Wu and one of his students. They will also bring along a few less experienced ones. Imperial Physician Jiyu also wanted to go, but I didn't allow it. In Shang Junlin's heart, Subei was important, but Shinyu's health was another matter. Imperial Physician Jiyu was responsible for Shinyu's health. He wouldn't let Imperial Physician Jiyu leave so easily. There are no problems with these people. What do you think? Shang Junlin didn't think that Shinyu would ask about this for no reason. There are some things I want to say about Fei Meng. In the end, after Shinyu and Shang Junlin discussed, they decided to reveal some important information to Imperial Physician Wu. Imperial Physician Wu's medical skills were excellent, and he had studied all kinds of epidemics. If it really involved Fei Meng, Imperial Physician Wu would be able to distinguish it in time. Imperial Physician Courtyard. Imperial Doctor Wu called his student and Imperial Doctor Jiyu over. I've already spoken to His Majesty. You don't have to worry too much. There are many doctors going to Subei. There won't be any problems. Imperial Physician Wu comforted his disciples. He knew that his students were worried about him, but there were some things that if everyone did not do out of fear of possible risks, it would only lead to more serious consequences. Moreover, he had come into contact with various epidemics in the past, so it was not as scary as the rumors said. It was just that the infection rate was slightly higher. If the cause of the disease was found and the right medicine was used, the disease could still be cured. As a doctor, he should treat all illnesses equally. If he gave up because of fear, he might as well quit being a doctor. We know that we can't persuade teacher, and we won't. We only hope that teacher can take good care of himself. Third senior brother, when you go with teacher, you must remind teacher to eat on time, rest on time, and not be overworked. In truth, it wasn't that they didn't want their teacher to go, but they couldn't help but worry. After all, their teacher was getting on in years. Going to the faraway Subei, where the environment was harsh, what if something happened? Brothers, don't worry. I will. The third disciple stood up and cupped his hands to everyone. Actually, I originally wanted to bring little Jiyu along. This is a very good opportunity for him to gain experience. Unfortunately, His Majesty won't allow it. Imperial Physician Wu knew that Imperial Physician Gu's qualifications were still lacking if he wanted to take over his position. If he could go with him to Subei, he could earn some merits. Imperial Physician Jiyu also wanted to go. On one hand, he studied because of his family background, and on the other hand, he wanted to save the people of the world. He had expressed his thoughts to His Majesty in private, but His Majesty clearly hoped that he could stay in the capital and look after His Majesty's health. Imperial Physician Wu gave a few more instructions to his students. He was determined to go to Subei. How could he not know that he was getting on in years? But with his medical skills, he still had to put them to good use. You all should also relax. This time, there hasn't been an epidemic in Subei yet. We're going to do more to prevent it, so it's not that dangerous. Instead of worrying here, why don't you use what you've learned to make some medicine? I'll bring it with me when the time comes. Imperial Physician Wu didn't want his students to be stuck in a state of worry, so he suggested. Based on his experience, Imperial Physician Wu listed some necessary items and entered the palace to make a final report. At that time, Shang Junlin was with Shen Yu, so he asked Imperial Physician Wu to come directly to Yuzhong Palace. This was the first time Imperial Physician Wu saw Shen Yu at such a close distance. He once thought that Shen Yu was a sickly beauty, but when he saw him, he discovered that he wasn't. If he didn't know that Shen Yu had congenital deficiency in advance, Imperial Physician Wu would have thought that he was a normal person just by looking at his current appearance. His complexion was very good, his eyes were bright, and there wasn't a trace of illness on his body. Sitting together with His Majesty, his aura wasn't suppressed at all. The atmosphere between the two complemented each other and couldn't tolerate anyone else. No wonder His Majesty didn't want Jiyu Chong to go to Subei. At this moment, Imperial Physician Wu understood. Because in His Majesty's heart, Guojuan's status was not lower than anything else. It was even faintly higher than anything else. There could be many doctors going to Subei. One more Imperial Physician Jiyu wouldn't make a difference. However, the only one who could make His Majesty feel assured to nurse Guojuan's body was Imperial Physician Jiyu. Imperial Physician Jiyu was indeed the most talented doctor he had ever seen. If it weren't for Shi Cai, he wouldn't have made an exception to let Imperial Physician Jiyu enter the Imperial Hospital. Now, he wouldn't have made an exception and wanted to pass his position to him. According to the pulse recorded by the Imperial Hospital, Guojuan's physical condition was really not good. Even if Imperial Physician Wu were to nurse Guojuan's body, it probably wouldn't have the effect it had now. Imperial Physician Wu, please sit down. Don't be restrained. Shun Yu asked the palace servants to bring a chair for Imperial Physician Wu. He and Shang Junlin were originally playing chess in the courtyard. When they heard that Imperial Physician Wu had come, they directly met him in the courtyard. Since it wasn't a formal occasion, there was no need to be too restrained. After Imperial Physician Wu sat down, he talked about the preparations of the Imperial Hospital and some handover matters. This official will temporarily hand over the Imperial Hospital to Jiyu Chong. Your Majesty, please rest assured. This official has arranged everything. After this official leaves, the Imperial Hospital will operate as usual. There won't be any trouble. I know. If there's anything you need, just tell me. This time, you're going to Subei to do things for me. I won't treat you unfairly. Shang Junlin said. Your Majesty is too serious. Even if Your Majesty didn't give the order, this official would have wanted to go there personally. This official sat in this position because of the merit of curing the epidemic. These years, there hasn't been any new epidemic under Your Majesty's rule, so there's no place for this official to use his skills. Your Majesty, please rest assured. With this official here, this official will not let any problems occur in Subei. No one except Imperial Physician Wu dared to make such a promise. With you here, I'm very relieved. During this trip, Imperial Physician Wu must also take good care of your body. Shang Junlin still had a lot of trust in Imperial Physician Wu's medical skills. Thank you for your concern, Your Majesty. As a subject, what he hoped most was to be appreciated by the Emperor. Imperial Physician Wu felt that everything was worth it to hear Shang Junlin's words today. There's one more thing. The medical alcohol that I gave you before can not only reduce wound infection, but also be used to disinfect. Another thing is, if there really is an epidemic, I hope that Imperial Physician Wu can carefully observe and see if there are any differences or similarities between this epidemic and the ones you've seen before. I've listed some things here. If the situation matches up, I hope that Imperial Physician Wu can report the news to Lord Fang as soon as possible. Shun Yu waved his hand. Mu Shi, bring the things here. Mu Shi presented a sealed letter and handed it to Imperial Physician Wu. Imperial Physician Wu, just read the things inside and remember them by yourself. Shang Junlin said. This official obeys. Why did you write those things to Imperial Physician Wu? After Imperial Physician Wu left, Shang Junlin asked, previously, you asked about Fei Meng. Is it because he suspects that the epidemic in Subei is related to Fei Meng? It had to be said that Shang Junlin was a very sensitive person. He could easily grasp the most crucial information from a person's movements and then integrate it to reach a conclusion that was infinitely close to the truth. You can say that. Shun Yu didn't hide anything from Shang Junlin now. But it's just my personal guess. Whether it's true or not depends on Imperial Physician Wu's verification. In the letter, Shun Yu wrote about the phenomenon of the man-made epidemic and the symptoms of some people who were infected. He also wrote some countermeasures according to the memory of his previous life. The man-made epidemic that he knew of didn't happen in the present, so he wasn't sure if the other party would take action. Don't worry. We've made sufficient preparations this time. Nothing will happen. Shang Junlin held Shun Yu's hand and comforted him. After the first batch of relief materials was organized, they were transported to Subei from all over the country. Shang Junlin gave a strict order that every donation of money and materials must be made public. When the materials arrived in Subei, how to use them would be transmitted to each place so that the people could participate in the whole process. Shun Yu and Shang Junlin had previously proposed to build a separate communication channel for each place. This was the first time that the latest information about the disaster relief would be sent to each place at the fastest speed through this channel. Unlike the court bulletin, this newspaper was for everyone in Dahuan. Taking into account that there were people who were illiterate, special readers were arranged. At first, the imperial court didn't agree to do this. Some officials felt that it was improper to tell the people everything. Shang Junlin didn't bother to pay attention to them and directly gave the order. Once the imperial edict was issued, not many people dared to disobey it. Only the Prime Minister suffered because there was one more thing he had to take responsibility for. After this incident, I plan to send He Chengyu and the others to Subei. At night, Shang Junlin said while reading through the memorials. Being transferred outside had always been the fastest way to increase one's qualifications. If one could make some achievements, they could be transferred back to the capital ahead of time and enter the center of power in Dahuan. Every official who passed the imperial examination had to go through this. According to the normal process, He Chengyu and the others needed to work in Hanlin Academy for 2 to 3 years, then be transferred outside, and then be transferred back to the capital step by step. Now, they had only worked in Hanlin Academy for less than half a year, and Shang Junlin wanted to send them to Subei. In fact, it was against the ancestral rules. However, in Shang Junlin's place, the ancestral rules were meant to be broken. Why does Your Majesty suddenly want them to go to Subei? When the disaster relief is over, I don't plan to keep any of these officials in Subei. If they still wanted to hide such a big incident, they shouldn't stay in that position. You, come over here and let me hug you. As soon as Shun Yu approached, the man pulled her into his arms. Shang Junlin buried his head in Shun Yu's neck and took a deep breath. Hug you and these things won't be so troublesome. Chapter 116. I'm not a panacea, how can I have such an effect? Shun Yu found a comfortable position in Shang Junlin's arms. You is more effective than any panacea for Jun. Shang Junlin buried his head in Shun Yu's neck, his voice slightly muffled. Then give His Majesty a hug. Shun Yu patted the man's head, so that His Majesty can deal with government affairs more energetically. Shang Junlin tightened his arms around the person in his arms. Were the officials in Subei sent by His Majesty later? Shun Yu looked at the booklet spread on the table. It was sent back by Fang Daran from Subei, and there were other officials beside him. Fang Daran brought officials from Jing City. Every time they arrived at a new place, they would be shocked speechless by the tragic situation there. They originally thought that the first small city they passed was already very bad, but the further north they went, the more they found that it was just the tip of the iceberg. The more they saw, the more shocking it became. Every time they arrived at a place, they would gather the people together after giving them porridge and do something that they could. When they recovered some of their strength, they would exchange it for more food according to how much they worked. They also had them help and relieve the local people who were unable to move. In the booklet written by Fang Daran, he described in detail the current situation of every place they passed. Just the written description was enough to make people feel despair. Some were directly promoted from the local area. Shang Junlin rubbed Shun Yu's fingers. Jun almost completely changed the upper-level officials in Subei. The imperial court didn't have many people that could be used, so they only sent some people over. Most of them were promoted from the local area. That year when Subei was lost, if Shang Junlin didn't lead troops to arrive in time and fight back the Northern Desert Army, it was hard to say if Da Huan would still be Da Huan today. Shang Junlin didn't want to listen to their excuses, so he directly chopped them down to comfort the souls of the soldiers who had died because of their dereliction of duty, and also to avenge the innocent people who had died. On the day of the execution, the entire city watched, and all of them applauded and cheered. Amidst the smell of blood, Shang Junlin had all the officials in Subei watch the execution with their own eyes. Some of the officials had lived like princes for many years and had never seen such a scene before. Their faces were pale and they did not dare to watch. However, each of them was guarded by 2 burly soldiers. As long as they tried to dodge, they would be stopped. Shang Junlin was also using this opportunity to warn the newly promoted people that if they could not defend Subei well, they should go down and accompany these people. He also took this opportunity to completely separate the military and political power in Subei. Under the bloody means, no one dared to refute. Since then, Subei was peaceful for a long time. Shang Junlin and Shun Yu talked about the past. Jun thought that they would learn to be obedient. Indeed, they did learn to be obedient. They didn't dare to do anything blatantly and only did some small actions in private. They also thought of ways to prevent the news from spreading to the capital. Shun Yu said, "The greed of people is always endless. After getting a little, they will want more. Over time, their greed will grow and they will never be satisfied." It has been 7 or 8 years since that incident. Time can wear away a lot of things, but it can also change a lot of things. The officials promoted by Your Majesty may be trustworthy, but after so many years, no one can guarantee that they will not change at all. Shang Junlin said, people's hearts are fickle. Jin knows that very well. Shen Yu said, after the truth is found out, punish those who should be punished and reward those who have made contributions. After so many years, Your Majesty is no longer the same as before. There is no need to be constrained by a lack of manpower. In order to prevent this kind of thing from happening again, Your Majesty can set a time limit for appointment. After the officials sent to Subei have served for a certain number of years, Your Majesty can return to the capital. The officials in Subei were divided into 3 categories: the Subei army, the officials transferred from the capital, and the local officials. It should have been a tripartite situation, but according to the news from the hidden dragon guards, the latter two had been mixed together. They had also planted people in the Subei army. Moreover, there was the shadow of another force among the 3. If the time limit is set, the officials sent from the capital will be less likely to stand on the same side as the local officials. Compared to Subei, they should want to return to the capital, the center of power. Then, they will spontaneously watch over Subei for the court in order to make their resumes look better. Shun Yu lowered his eyes and continued, once the time limit is up, they will return to the capital. Everything that happens in Subei will only become a stepping stone for their promotion. As long as their interests were not tied together with the officials in Subei, there was no need to worry that they would work together and harm the court. Shang Junlin seriously thought about it and realized that this was indeed a good idea. The mobility of the officials in Da Huan was not high. Unless they were particularly capable or had connections in the court, most of them would be sent to a certain place and most of them would stay there. If it was not a special place like Subei, there were many benefits to this. The more familiar the officials were with a certain place, the easier it would be for them to manage it. However, the most important thing right now was the disaster in Subei. As long as the drought did not subside, they would not be able to relax. Official Fang and the hidden dragon guards were in the open and in the dark, trying to understand the situation in Subei. Official Fang continued to lead the officials north. The further north they went, the more serious the disaster became. The officials from the capital also became more silent. They had never seen such a hellish scene. In the past, they had at most learned about the disaster through various documents. How could words compare to the shock of seeing it with their own eyes? The more they saw, the more they disagreed with the inaction of the officials in Subei. This was especially so when they heard more than once from the locals that if the disaster relief team had come earlier, perhaps not so many people would have died. The resentment in their hearts reached a peak. There were so many people. They could have saved their lives if they were willing to give them a share of the Subei army's military pay. The young official who spoke was choked with sobs. No one made a sound. No one who saw this scene could make a sound. In a destitute and dilapidated house, the emaciated mother did not have a single piece of good flesh on her body. Her child was curled up in her arms, a piece of flesh still wet in his mouth. It was obvious that the mother had bitten off the flesh from her body. Even in death, the mother stared at her child with wide eyes. If only we had come earlier. If only we had come earlier, perhaps we could have saved this mother and child. The house was filled with the thick stench of blood. No one complained about the pungent smell. They only felt a stabbing pain in their hearts. Along the way, they had seen all kinds of tragic scenes. They had thought that after seeing so much, they would become numb. It was only at this moment that they realized that no matter how many times they saw the scene in front of them, they could not become numb. Official Fang, can we really save Subei? After a long time, a young official could not help but ask. His face was full of confusion. Of course we can, Lord Fang replied firmly. We've already saved many people along the way. The imperial court has also collected enough supplies. Everyone, hold on for a few more days. They'll be here soon. Lord Fang looked at everyone's faces one by one. He knew that what he had seen and heard in the past few days had a great impact on these young officials. He also knew why they were so confused. It was because he had experienced the same thing in the past. Everyone, cheer up. News has come from His Majesty. This time, there are people from all over the country who are willing to come and help. The Disaster Relief Fund is also donated by the people of Daheng. Subei will not be abandoned by anyone in Daheng, the main city of Subei. In the magnificent main hall, young women in thin dance dresses danced to the music. Men in luxurious clothes raised their cups in celebration. That Fang Jun, are we going to let him continue like this? Don't ruin official Fang's plan. If he wants to see the real disaster in Subei, then let him see. He volunteered to work with the refugees. If he is accidentally injured by the refugees, it has nothing to do with us. Official Zun, don't you think so? Zun Zhao calmly looked around and drank the wine in his cup. Of course. It's not that we haven't tried to persuade him, but he is stubborn. If something really happens, how can we be blamed? Exactly. Come, let's continue drinking. Zun Zhao finished feigning civility with them and returned to his residence. Although he was not the highest official in Subei, his status was not low. When he returned home, the housekeeper came to greet him. Official Fang, have you drunk? Yes. Official Fang invited me, so I couldn't refuse. There were many colleagues at the banquet and they even talked about the refugees. Since ancient times, the refugees have been a difficult problem to solve. The housekeeper's eyes flashed. Official Fang, you should wash up first. I will order a bowl of hangover soup for you. Official Fang rubbed his forehead. I am a little dizzy. Help me in. In the darkness, a black robe silently streaked across the night sky. In an inconspicuous corner, a middle-aged man in a grey robe turned out of the courtyard and walked all the way to the corner of the street. There was an inconspicuous horse carriage parked there. Did you find anything? An emotionless voice came from the horse carriage. Official Fang, everything is as usual. There are no suspicious people in the residence. The man in the grey robe replied carefully. Zun residence. Zun Zhao rubbed his aching temples. He purposely said those words to the housekeeper in the courtyard just now so that he could pass the news to the hidden dragon guards hiding in the Zun residence. The housekeeper was also a member of the hidden dragon guards in disguise. However, there were other spies in the residence. The person in charge of passing the news was someone else. The capital. The resources collected from various places were transported to Subei. The capital was the first to receive the news and also the first to take action. The other places that were slightly further away would set off later. Other than the doctors, some young adults were also summoned from various places. The scorching summer was coming to an end. After a rain in the capital, the weather had cooled down significantly. Is it still not raining in Subei? Shunyu looked out the window at the pitter-patter of raindrops. No. Shang Junlin frowned. Although it rarely rains in Subei, it is rare for there to be no rain for several months like this year. There was already a discussion among the commoners about why there was no rain in Subei for several months. Droughts were often accompanied by locust plagues. Subei had already suffered a locust plague in May or June. Otherwise, there would not have been no harvest. If there is no rain for a long time, I am afraid there will be bad rumors. Shunyu's words became a prophecy. Within a few days, rumors began to appear in various places. It was said that the drought in Subei was a warning to the emperor not to do anything unkind and not to break the ancestral rules. It was obvious that every rumor was directed at Shang Junlin's actions during this period. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.